Hi guys. Tonight, we slip into a North Atlantic winter that does not care about your plans, your pride, or your toes. You are standing outside a Viking longhouse as the light fades early, the sky thickening into that blue-grey that always means trouble. Snow is already whispering across the ground, and you can feel the wind rehearsing its first hard lines. The sea is somewhere behind you, invisible now, but you smell it anyway in the salt that clings to your hair and the damp bite that rides every gust. You probably won't survive this if you try it in a hoodie and good vibes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights and come closer to the door as the storm begins to seal the world shut. You step toward the longhouse, and the first thing you notice is how low it sits against the land, like it's trying not to be seen by the wind. The roof slopes down near your shoulder, thick with turf and snow, and the walls are a patchwork of timber, earth, and patiently packed insulation. You run your gloved hand along the outer planks and feel ice crusting in the grain. The door is not grand. It is practical, narrow, and a little stubborn, the kind of entrance that makes heat feel precious. You duck through, and the sound changes immediately. Outside was all hiss and howl. Inside is a muffled, living hush, as if the house itself is holding its breath. The air is dim, not because people are trying to be dramatic, but because winter afternoons vanish quickly at this latitude. A faint orange glow wavers from the middle of the room. It is not a roaring fireplace with brickwork and a cheerful mantel. There's no clever chimney here. Instead, you see a central hearth, basically a long, low fire pit set into the packed earth floor. That is a mainstream historical fact, by the way. Viking longhouses typically used open central hearths for heat and cooking, and the smoke drifted up to a vent or smoke hole in the roof rather than through a built fireplace. The whole system is simple, smoky, and surprisingly effective if you know how to live with it. You inhale and taste the room. Smoke is there, yes, but not choking. It's familiar, woven into the air like another layer of clothing. It smells of birch and pine resin, and something fatty from the last meal. Closer to the doorway, it's colder, because drafts creep in any way they can. Closer to the center, you feel warmth on your cheeks. It's not summer warmth, it's survival warmth. And already the people around you are moving with that special efficiency you get when winter is a co-worker who never calls in sick. You are not alone in here. You catch shapes in the half-light. A woman stirring something heavy in an iron pot. A man repairing a strap with fingers that look carved from old rope. Kids that are mostly noise and elbows until they suddenly go quiet, because the adults are quiet. In a corner you spot a couple of sheep, and maybe a goat, blinking at you like you're the one out of place. Yes, animals inside. It's not a petting zoo vibe, it's a warmth strategy. When a blizzard hits, humans and livestock share the structure. Their body heat adds to the indoor temperature, and in return they are protected from the worst of the wind. You might think it's a little gross. You are correct, but it's also brilliant in the way you become brilliant when the alternative is freezing. You take a few slow steps forward. The floor is hard earth, packed down over years. You can feel it through your boots, a chill rising upward, reminding you that the ground does not care about your comfort either. Along the long sides of the hall, raised sleeping platforms line the walls like benches in a train car. Not beds in the modern sense, more like wooden ledges covered with straw, furs, and wool. Families will sleep there later, shoulder to conserve heat in a human knot. Tonight you will, too, but we are not there yet. Right now you are still at the border between day and night, and the storm is still building speed. A gust hits the longhouse wall, and the whole structure answers with a low creak. You feel it in your ribs. The roof doesn't rattle like a flimsy tent. It settles like an old animal tightening its muscles. Vikings learned to build for wind. They used thick walls, sometimes double-layered with earth or turf, and low profiles that let the gale slide over instead of punching straight through. You can almost hear the weather scraping across the roof, searching for a weakness, and failing. Not every longhouse is the same, and historians still argue whether roof vents were consistently open in the harshest months, or sometimes partially covered to keep more heat in. That debate matters because it changes how smoky or breathable nights would have been. For you, though, the point is simple. The house survives by being humble, heavy, and well sealed. You drift closer to the hearth, careful not to step into it, because that would be a short and embarrassing bedtime story. The fire is not huge. People are stingy with wood in winter. Trees are a resource, and hauling firewood in deep snow is misery. So the flames are controlled, a steady glow. You notice a few stones resting near the edge, dark and smooth. Someone will heat them, and later wrap them in cloth to tuck into bedding. It's like an early hot water bottle, except it could also burn a hole in your blanket if you're not paying attention. You see that kind of quiet ingenuity everywhere in hard climates. A small boy scuttles past you carrying something that looks like a carved stick. He hides it in straw and grins. You ask what it is, and the older woman laughs softly and tells you it's a sleep wand, a little charm he thinks keeps nightmares away. That's your quirky tidbit for this section. There are scattered hints in saga culture and folklore of sleep charms and small protective objects, sometimes with carved runes or just personal meaning, used to guard the mind at night. Not official state policy, not a museum label, but real human behavior. When the weather is terrifying and the dark is long, you don't only need insulation for your body, you want it for your thoughts. The storm outside goes from rehearsal to performance. Snow hits the roof in thick pulses. The light that slips through the smoke hole dims further, and the hall takes on the color of embers. The people react without panic. They have done this every winter since forever. Someone pushes a wooden shutter tighter. Someone else drapes another hide over the doorway. You watch their movements and realize that blizzard nights are not a surprise here. They are planned for the way you plan for taxes, or traffic, or that one relative who always arrives early. The longhouse is a machine for winter living. Your own body starts to settle into the rhythm. You are still cold in the bones, but the edges of you are warming. The soundscape becomes hypnotic. Fire crackle low and steady, wind pressing and sliding along the walls like a restless ocean. The occasional soft bleat from a sheep that has decided to be dramatic for no reason. Somewhere, a spoon scrapes wood. In the far end of the hall, beyond the hearth, you can just make out the high seat, the honor spot where the household leader sits. It's a little raised, a little grander. Status matters even in survival mode. But the storm equalizes everyone. Even the chieftain has to sleep. You turn your head and see bedding being prepared. Straw fluffed and spread. Woolen blankets shaken out with little puffs of dust. Furs laid on top, heavy and glossy. You touch a cloak and feel lanolin in the fibers. That greasy natural oil that helps repel moisture. It smells like sheep and smoke and effort. Vikings had an entire economy of wool. They spun, wove, and traded it. Good wool and good furs were not just fashion, they were life. On nights like this, rich and poor both want the same thing, a way to keep their core heat from leaking into the black air. The room grows quieter as the meal finishes. You feel that post-supper heaviness rolling in, and you can already guess how it will help later. A full stomach is another layer. Calorie-dense winter food is not romantic. It's strategic. Stew with barley, dried fish, maybe a thick porridge. The body turns it into warmth while you sleep. A slow, internal fire. You watch them drink a little ale or mead, not to get smashed, but to soften the cold in the mind. You can almost hear your modern self whispering about hydration and sleep quality. The Vikings would nod politely and then do what works. Outside, the blizzard is at full voice now. Inside, the longhouse is steady. You feel the contrast in your skin. You're safe enough to relax, and your eyelids are getting that pleasant weight. The night is not over, not even close. You still have to choose where to sleep, and how to do it without a proper fireplace or a neat chimney to tame the smoke. But for now you are simply here, in the thick heart of the hall, watching a community settle into the storm like a ship settling into its harbor. You take one last long breath, tasting smoke and wool and simmered fat, and you let your shoulders drop. The longhouse holds you, the weather rages, and somewhere between those two facts, your Viking night begins for real. You shift closer to the wall where the draft is weakest, and you start noticing what is not here. In your world, a winter house almost automatically means a fireplace, a brick throat pulling smoke upward, a tidy spot to warm your hands and pretend you are in a holiday catalogue. Here, that neat picture never really existed. You look around and see the hearth, yes, but no built-in stone fireplace, no tall chimney stack. The fire is open, wide, and low, like a tame animal kept on a leash. That absence is not a mistake. It is how this place is meant to work. Long before anyone in Scandinavia was laying fancy chimneys, people were building with what they had: timber, turf, and a lot of patience. A hearth in the center spreads heat in all directions, which matters in a hall where everyone shares the same big room. A single fireplace tucked into a wall would have warmed one corner and left the rest to shiver. Here the heat leaks outward like ripples from a stone dropped in a pond. You feel that logic right away. Place yourself near the middle and your cheeks thaw. Drift toward the ends and your nose goes cold again. The house is a map of temperature, and the hearth is its compass. A mainstream historical fact for you to pocket as you move through this night. Open central hearths were the standard in most Viking-age longhouses, and true masonry fireplaces with chimneys only became common later in medieval northern Europe. In the Viking period, smoke typically rose to a roof vent or floated under the rafters before finding its way out. That meant indoor life was always in gentle negotiation with smoke. You can see the negotiation in the darkened beams above you, slick with years of soot. It is not pretty, but it tells you the house has been doing this for a long time. You tilt your head up. The rafters are low enough that you can almost imagine the smoke as another person, sliding along the ceiling, familiar and half-tamed. Some of it escapes through the roof opening. Some of it settles into the timber, preserving it from rot and insects. That last part is interesting because it turns annoyance into advantage. Smoke is irritating to breathe, sure, but it also keeps pests down and helps dry the interior. The Vikings did not have chemical sprays or sealed plastic bins. They had a smoky roof and a strong tolerance for mild discomfort. You wander toward the doorway for a moment, just to feel the contrast, and a spear of cold pokes your chest. You retreat again, thinking about how architecture is basically frozen weather turned into shape. The longhouse is a creature built to avoid losing heat. It is long and narrow. The entrances are small, the walls are thick. Even without a wall fireplace, it holds warmth the way a thermos holds tea. You are starting to see why fireplaces were not the obvious choice. In a world where stone is not always plentiful, where fuel is precious, and where the whole household lives together, the simple, open hearth is practical. Still, practical does not mean easy. You can sense the smoke in your hair and on your tongue. It stings a little, especially if you stand too long in the wrong pocket of air. You notice that people do not sit blindly wherever they want. They know the sweet spots. There is a low area near the hearth where the smoke slides above head height. There are benches where you can work without coughing. There is a reason the sleeping platforms are raised and set along the walls. Higher up, the air is sometimes clearer and warmer, depending on how the smoke moves, but that movement is never perfectly predictable. And here is where the debate sneaks in. Scholars still disagree about how fully enclosed Viking longhouses were in the coldest months. Some interpret evidence to suggest smoke holes were left fairly open to prevent suffocation and keep the hearth usable. Others think households partially covered vents during blizzards, accepting heavier smoke for extra warmth. The argument matters because it changes the sensory reality of nights like this. Was it a breathable, lightly smoky comfort, or a hazy fog you had to tolerate for survival? You can feel how both options could be true depending on weather, region, and the stubborn habits of the people inside. You drift past the byre corner where animals stand, chewing quietly. Their breath makes small clouds in the air, and you imagine how it might mingle with smoke, creating a different way of thinking about indoor air than you are used to. The room is not sanitized. It is alive. Warmth comes from bodies, fires, and insulation, all mixed together. And because there is no separate fireplace room, no chimney pulling all the smoke out in a tidy line, the longhouse feels more like a sheltered campsite than a modern house. Shelter, not perfection, is the goal. Someone calls you over. A man with a lined face is checking the wall where the wind is hitting hardest. He presses a hand against the timber, then stuffs a twist of wool into a crack you can barely see. The wool is not wasted. It is old, maybe pulled from a torn garment, and it is now draft stopper duty. You watch him do it with the casual skill of someone who has been fixing winter leaks since childhood. You realize that managing cold here is a constant little job, not a once-a-season chore. Every gust is a reminder to patch, pile, tuck, and tighten. You sit beside a woman who is twisting cord by the ember light. She carries on working as if the blizzard is background music. You ask about the smoke and the lack of a wall fireplace, and she shrugs in a way that means, "This is life." Then she tells you something odd. She says some households in the far north used dried seaweed or even fish bones mixed into their fuel when wood was scarce, because anything that burns, burns. That is your quirky tidbit for this section. It is not the norm everywhere, and some of it comes from later accounts and local traditions. But it fits a real problem. In treeless coastal areas, or during especially harsh winters, people improvised fuel. Imagine the smell of fishy smoke curling into your blankets. Not lovely, but better than freezing. You glance at the hearth again after hearing that, and feel suddenly grateful for birch and pine. Even so, you notice the fire is not roaring. It is a controlled, steady heat. People add fuel slowly. They keep flames low so they do not waste wood, and so the smoke does not thicken too much. It is a balancing act. Too little fire, and the hall chills. Too much fire, and the roof turns into a smoke trap. Or worse, a hazard. Open hearths make sparks a constant risk. You see a bucket of water nearby and a pile of sand, ready for emergencies. Fire is friend and threat in the same breath. The minutes slide. The storm keeps throwing itself at the walls, and you start realizing that Vikings were not relying on a single heat source anyway. The hearth is only one piece. Without fireplaces, they leaned on design and habit. They used thick clothing indoors. They clustered people and animals. They shut shutters early. They reduced the volume of air that needed heating by building low ceilings and narrow spaces. Even their daily schedule adjusted. Work that required dexterity happened close to the hearth. Tasks that could be done numbly happened at the edges. Living here is like learning the rules of a quiet game. You listen to the wind and imagine what it would feel like outside now. The cold would cut through your clothes in minutes, especially if you were wet. You picture a traveler caught on the road, trying to dig a snow hollow, trying to keep a tiny flame alive in screaming wind. The longhouse in comparison is a fortress, even without a fireplace. It is not cozy in a modern way. It is steady. It is enough. You start to see why that enough was the point. Someone begins to bank the fire for the night. You watch the routine. They rake the coals into a tight core. They add a thicker chunk of wood that will burn slowly. They spread ash over the edges to keep it from flaring. This is bedtime preparation. The same way you might set a thermostat or pull up a blanket. You feel the room readying itself for sleep, not with a dramatic extinguishing of lights, but with small decisions that conserve everything. You rub your hands together and feel that the smoke has settled into your skin. You are getting used to it. The house smells like effort, like old stories baked into timber. And you understand now that the absence of a wall fireplace is not a lack at all. It is a different solution to the same problem. Heat without waste, smoke without suffocation, survival without luxury, a whole architecture of compromise. You settle back on a bench and let the rhythm of the blizzard and the hearth blend into one soft, constant pulse. You can almost feel your body sinking to it, readying to follow the household into the deeper part of the night. You find yourself staring at the longhouse walls the way you might stare at a cliff when you are hiking in winter, not because it's pretty, but because your safety depends on it. The storm keeps pitching itself outside, but in here the wall feels like a calm shoulder between you and chaos. You shuffle closer, putting your palm on the inner surface. It's not smooth plaster. It's wood, rough in places, warmed by countless bodies leaning against it over years. Behind that timber, you know there is more. The house is not a single skin. It's layered, the way you layer clothes when the cold gets serious. You can feel the thickness just by listening. Wind hits the outside, and you hear a dull thump rather than a sharp rattle. That sound tells you there's mass here. Many Viking longhouses used a combination of wooden frames and turf or earth-packed walls. Archaeological digs across Scandinavia have revealed these thick, insulated constructions, sometimes with walls built as timber, outer layers filled with turf, stones, and soil. In other words, these people built their homes like they built ships, with an eye for what weather could do when it got angry. The wall is an agreement with winter. You can scream all you want, says the wall. You're not getting in. You look along the length of the hall. The roof slopes low, and the walls rise only as high as they need to. A tall, airy room would be a disaster. Heat would drift upward and disappear into useless space. Here, the ceiling presses down like a warm hand. The air volume is smaller, easier to keep above freezing. You feel it in your breath. You aren't blowing out clouds inside. That alone is a quiet miracle when the world outside is turning white. A woman passes you, carrying an armful of hay to refresh the bedding platforms. As she goes by, you notice her shoulder brushing the wall without thought. No one avoids the wall because it's cold. It's part of the warm zone, especially down low where the turf and earth store heat. The thick materials act like a battery, taking in warmth from the hearth and bodies, then releasing it slowly through the night. You might not have known to call it thermal mass, but you can feel it working. The house doesn't rely on constant roaring fire. It relies on holding on to whatever warmth it gets and rationing it out hour by hour. Outside, another heavy gust arrives. The wall does not shiver. It answers with a low, old creak. That sound is oddly comforting. The longhouse is alive in a practical way, flexing, settling, making room for the storm to pass above it. You remember how low the house looked from outside, almost crouched. That isn't random. A low profile means less wind force. With a roof packed in sod or turf, the whole structure becomes heavier. The wind has less leverage. Even the snow piling on top helps, pressing down and sealing gaps. It's like nature adds its own insulation as the blizzard grows. You step toward the end of the longhouse where supplies are stored. The floor is slightly higher here, and the air is a shade cooler. The hearth's warmth reaches this far, but softened. Still, it's not bitter. You run your fingers over a beam and feel soot, dry and chalky. Above, you can see where smoke has stained the rafters over decades. That staining is not only proof of fire, it's proof of continuity. When you see a house with years of soot in its bones, you know people have endured many winters here. This place has passed the test repeatedly. Your mind wanders to the materials. Turf is not glamorous. It's grass and roots hacked into blocks, stacked like earthy bricks. But turf is brilliant for cold climates because it traps air within dense plant matter, making a thick, insulating layer. In Iceland especially, where timber is scarce, turf houses were common for centuries, and their Viking-era ancestors set the template. The smell of turf is faintly sweet and damp, like soil after rain, but in winter it becomes part of the house's protective scent. Earth, smoke, animal warmth, wool, a whole bouquet of survival. One of the men, broad-shouldered and sleepy-eyed, notices you studying the wall. He gives a little nod, then flicks you a crooked smile like you're a child impressed by a grown-up trick. He taps the wall with his knuckles. It is solid. Then he points to a spot where two planks meet and shows you the seam. It's stuffed with moss and wool. Stops the wind, he says. You imagine the kind of patience it takes to pack every seam before winter, then check them in storms like this. Maintenance is not a special event here. It's part of breathing. There's a small basket near the seam, filled with tufts of dried moss. That catches your attention because it seems almost too simple. Moss is not fancy insulation, but it is easy to gather, compressible, and surprisingly effective. There are hints from later Scandinavian rural practice and the logic of the environment that people used moss, grass, and even animal hair to seal cracks. You picture someone in autumn, going along the walls with a child, showing them how to plug a draft. A lesson passed down not through books, but through cold fingers. You touch the packed moss and feel it is dry to the core, not spongy. That tells you there is little moisture getting through. Moisture is cold's best friend. A wet wall would suck heat away from you in minutes, so the house aims to stay dry. The roof's sod layer sheds water slowly. The smoke dries the interior. The fire keeps humidity low. Even the animals help by providing steady warmth. Every element is part of a system aimed at one final goal, not letting dampness win. As you stand there, you remember that some longhouses were built partly sunk into the ground. That's another well-attested practice in parts of the Viking world. A lower floor line meant the walls were protected by earth banks, which cut wind and buffered temperature. It's like building your home into a blanket, an extra trick when you are living on the edge of the habitable map. You can almost feel how the ground itself becomes a shield, refusing to let cold get a clean shot at you. But not everything is perfectly understood. There's still real disagreement about how much of the wall structure was timber versus turf in different regions and social classes. Some scholars see more timber-heavy walls in wealthy farmsteads. Others argue turf and earth were near universal because they were simply better insulation, regardless of status. The evidence varies by site, and the surviving traces are sometimes frustratingly incomplete. Tonight, though, you don't need to resolve the argument. The wall you are leaning on is thick enough to make you forget the storm for a moment. That is the truth you can feel without a footnote. You drift back toward the center, letting your hand slide along the wall as you go, and you start to notice the roof again. From inside, it doesn't look like a roof in the modern way. There's no clean drywall. You see beams, cross timbers, a skeleton that holds up a heavy skin. The smoky air curls up there, slow and lazy now. In a blizzard, the roof is everything. The turf layer on top adds insulation, but it also makes the roof heavier and more stable. Snow gathers on top and acts like more insulation. You might worry about collapse, but the timbers are thick and the slope helps shed some weight. Yes, a deep storm can still be dangerous, but these houses are built for a world that expects snow. They've sized the bones accordingly. A kid near you giggles and points upward. You follow her finger and see little icicles hanging inside near the smoke hole, glinting faintly. It's a tiny reminder that winter does creep in where it can. The opening in the roof is necessary for smoke, light, and ventilation, but it's also a weak point. In the harshest storms, snow can blow inward. That's why the household keeps a pot or a trough below it, catching meltwater, and why people know to keep bedding away from that zone. It's not dramatic, it's just housecraft. While you're looking up, a soft shower of soot dusts down, and you blink, half amused. The house is old. It sheds its history on you. You brush the grit off your sleeve and think about how soot might actually help preserve the roof timbers, discouraging insects the way the salt air preserves fish. The same stuff that makes your eyes prickly is also part of why you're not sleeping under a roof full of wood-boring pests. Near the far wall, you see a stack of shields hung like decoration. They are there partly for readiness, sure, but they also add an extra thin layer against drafts when winter is vicious. Sometimes practical solutions become aesthetics by accident. A home that expects attack by men and weather will use the same objects to resist both. If a shield can turn a sword blow, maybe it can also soften a gust sneaking through a doorway. You file that away, smiling at the improvisation. You return to your spot by the sleeping platforms, and now the wall feels different to you. It's not background. It's active. It's a participant in your comfort. People sit with backs against it tonight because it is holding and giving warmth all the time. You notice how the bedding is arranged with the wall in mind. Straw nearest the wall, then furs on top, so the cold from the timber doesn't bite through. Even the way people lean their cloaks against the wall during the evening lets the fabric warm up before bedtime. Small habits that assume the wall will do its job, and it does. The blizzard keeps going, but it's starting to fade in your awareness. The longhouse has absorbed its noise into thick layers of earth and wood. You breathe deeper. Your body is no longer braced for cold. You are steadily shifting into the feeling of being held. That's what these walls are for. Not to impress, not to dazzle, but to endure, and let you endure with them. And as you settle into that idea, you realize that the Vikings' answer to winter without fireplaces was never just fire. It was architecture that acted like another garment, another person, another promise. A wall of turf, wood, and stubbornness. The storm can howl. The wall will keep saying no. You lift your eyes again, because something in this house keeps pulling your attention upward. It is not a painted ceiling or some proud carving. It is the open throat in the roof, the smoke hole, a dark square where night presses against the warm interior like a hand on a window. Earlier, it looked like a simple vent. Now, as the blizzard thickens, it feels like a character in the room. It is quiet, yes, but it is also the thin line between breathing and choking, between light and darkness, between a livable hall and a sealed box of smoke. You watch the smoke travel. It rises from the hearth in lazy ribbons, then begins to pool along the rafters. At first it looks heavy, like it wants to stay, but then it finds the opening and drifts out in a slow exhale. This is not a chimney that sucks smoke upward with force. It is more like the house sighing. When the wind outside plays nice, the smoke escapes smoothly. When the wind snarls, like tonight, the air can push back down, making the smoke swirl and hesitate. You can feel the room adjusting, as if everyone instinctively knows which way the air is leaning. One thing the evidence makes pretty clear is that Viking-age longhouses depended on roof vents or smoke holes for ventilation. The central hearth could not function safely without a way for smoke to exit, and so most halls were built with some kind of opening at the highest point. Some had simple gaps in the roof ridge. Some used a louvered cover that could be shifted. In any case, the smoke hole is a basic, widely recognized feature of this architecture. You are looking at a solution that is almost as old as fire indoors. Still, you notice how much of a compromise it is. The smoke hole lets out what you do not want, but also lets in what you fear. Tiny snowflakes drift through in the gustiest moments, spinning in the smoky light before settling on the floor as soft white freckles. Each flake melts quickly in the warmth, but it reminds you that the opening is never free. It is a bargain. You get to breathe, but winter gets a finger inside the door. You stand beneath the opening, not directly under it because that is the cold drop zone, but close enough to feel the subtle draft. The air here is cooler, and it carries a faint scent of the outside, sharp and clean compared to the smoky interior. That clean scent is comforting in a strange way. It balances the fire smell and makes you feel less trapped. The Vikings were not allergic to fresh air. They just needed it on their terms. The smoke hole is how they negotiated those terms. A woman with braids as thick as rope notices you lingering. She tosses a small handful of dry juniper onto the coals. The smoke changes instantly, turning sweeter, resinous, almost medicinal. You blink, surprised by the pleasantness. She smiles. Juniper smoke is good for the air, she claims. Maybe it keeps sickness away. Maybe it just helps the hall smell better after a day of animals, wet wool, and humans living too close. There is no lab test here to prove her right, but there are echoes of this practice in Nordic tradition. People burned fragrant branches, herbs, or even bits of peat to shift the smell and feel of indoor air. That is your offbeat little detail for this part of the night. It is a small comfort, half practical and half psychological, and it shows you that even in survival mode, people wanted their homes to feel good, not just functional. You return to watching the airflow. The blizzard is loud now, but inside you hear a different kind of sound. Smoke makes a faint whisper as it slides through the rafters. It is almost like a tide. You imagine people lying down later, their faces turned away from the strongest smoke currents, their heads angled so they are not breathing in the thickest layer. You can see why sleeping platforms are slightly raised. The air higher up can be warmer, but it can also be smokier. The ideal height depends on wind and fire. Some nights you might want to sleep lower to avoid smoke irritation. Other nights you might climb higher to get away from floor chill. Sleeping here is not a fixed arrangement. It is a responsive craft. There is another subtle benefit to the smoke hole you might not have guessed. It is also a lantern, with no candles burning all night, and no glass windows to gather daylight. That roof opening gives a thin beam of starlight or moonlight, even on cloudy nights. The light is faint, but your eyes adjust. You can see enough to move without tripping over sleeping bodies. You can see enough to reach the fire if it needs tending. In the deep dark of a storm, that sliver matters. Over near the high seat, one of the men stands and reaches up with a long pole. He nudges something above, perhaps a simple shutter or a skin flap. The smoke hole narrows slightly. You feel the draft calm down. The air inside gets a touch warmer, and the smoke thickens just a little. He is tuning the house the way you might tune a thermostat, except his thermostat is a hole in the roof, and his fingers are numb. You realize how intimate this knowledge is. Not everyone in the hall adjusts it. It is a skill learned through winters. The opening is a dial, and someone has to know how far to turn it. This is also where the uncertainty shows up. Modern researchers do not all agree on how standardized these vents were, or how actively they were managed. Some reconstructions assume the opening stayed mostly constant, relying on the natural rise of smoke and gaps in the roof. Other interpretations suggest that people used movable covers regularly, especially in brutal weather, to reduce heat loss while still venting enough to survive. The archaeological record gives hints but not always clear instructions, and regional tradition could have varied a lot. So even today, there is a live question floating over the rafters. How much did Vikings really seal themselves in during storms, and how smoky was the trade-off they accepted? You take a slow breath and test your own tolerance. The smoke does sting if you inhale sharply. If you breathe gently through your nose, it is easier, almost soothing. You imagine falling asleep to this scent. It is not vanilla candle cozy. It is the smell of warmth that had to be earned. On a psychological level, smoke tells you the fire is alive. If the smoke stops and the room cools, that would mean danger. So the faint haze becomes a comfort signal, like the hum of a heater in your modern home. Your mind wanders to the way people might have used the smoke itself. It is easy to forget. In a world of refrigerators, that smoke is preservation. Above you, strips of meat hang in the rafters, dark silhouettes that sway slightly. The heat and smoke cure them slowly. You are not just in a sleeping hall, you are in a food workshop. Your bed is under a larder. That feels strange to you, but it makes sense. The warmest, smokiest air is near the ceiling, so that is where you hang food. The smoke hole regulates that curing environment too. Too much draft and the smoke clears too quickly. Too little and the air gets stale. Every winter night inside a longhouse is also a quiet act of saving future meals. A child crouches by the hearth, poking at a glowing stick with a twig. He is told to stop and shoot away, but not harshly. You can tell he is learning. Fire is never left unguarded when little hands are near. In this kind of open hearth world, sparks are a constant risk, and the smoke hole is part of preventing disaster. If you cannot vent smoke, the fire has to be smaller. If the fire is too small, you freeze. If the fire is too large, you choke or burn the roof. The smoke hole is the balancing point in a triangle of survival. You feel your shoulders loosen as you understand the system more deeply. The blizzard outside is trying to steal heat. The hearth is trying to make heat. The smoke hole is trying to let the bad part out without letting too much cold in. It is a fragile piece, but it has been practiced long enough to feel almost effortless to the people around you. A new gust goes over the roof, and for a moment the smoke is pushed sideways, curling down toward your face. Your eyes water slightly. Someone laughs quietly, a soft sound of familiarity. They are not bothered in the way you are because this is the air they grew up with. They know the wind will shift again. And it does. The smoke lifts, slides, escapes. The house resumes its slow breathing. You step back to the center of the hall, letting your eyes lower from the roof to the people. They are winding down, talking less, moving toward bedding. The smoke hole above keeps doing its invisible work. You might not think about it in a modern house. Here, you cannot stop thinking about it, because it is both hazard and helper. It is a reminder that comfort in this world is never total. It is always negotiated. You feel sleepy now, and the idea of climbing onto the sleeping platform starts to sound not just possible, but inviting. You let one last look drift upward. The opening is a black square framed by rafters, with snow flicking past like white insects. It looks almost like the night sky is peeking in to check on you. You accept the bargain. You breathe the smoky warmth. You allow a little winter to sneak in through the roof, because the alternative is no warmth at all. And as the hall settles deeper into quiet, you understand that the smoke hole is not a flaw in the longhouse. It is the longhouse's way of staying alive. You drift toward the long side of the hall, where the raised platforms wait like quiet shelves for human bodies. Earlier, you only glanced at them. Now, with the blizzard fully committed outside and the fire banked for the night, these benches become the true center of survival. You step up onto one with care, boots scraping wood, and you feel how the platform lifts you away from the cold bite of the floor. It is not a bed with springs and soft linen. It is a wide wooden ledge that runs along the wall, sometimes broken into family bays, sometimes open like a communal dock. You can imagine the generations that have climbed up here with tired limbs, each one trusting that this strip of wood is the difference between waking and not waking. The surface is layered. First there is straw, pressed flat by countless sleepers. On top of that sit woven blankets and hides. Some are patched and practical, some are thick and lustrous, the kind that means this household did well in the hunting season. When you kneel down and press your palm into the bedding, you feel the trapped air. Air is a secret ally in winter. A good bed does not need to be fluffy. It needs to keep pockets of still air that your body can warm and hold. You can smell the straw too, a dry, sweet farm scent, mingled with smoke and wool. It is a smell that says life continues even in the dark months. Across the Viking world, these side platforms or sleeping benches are a well-known feature of longhouse interiors. Archaeologists have found post holes, bench remnants, and interior layouts that show people slept along the walls rather than in separate rooms. This is not a quirky exception. It is architecture built around the idea that warmth is shared. The hearth warms the middle. The benches warm each other. The wall holds the heat. Sleep is a group project. You lower yourself onto the platform and let your legs dangle for a moment. The wood under you is smooth in some spots, ridged in others. It is polished by use. You imagine how this piece of furniture is also furniture for life. During the day, these benches are for sitting, working, sorting tools, nursing a baby, telling stories. At night, they become a shoreline, where everyone pulls up their blankets. The longhouse does not transform into a bedroom by changing rooms. It transforms by changing how the same space is used. That feels strangely efficient, like living inside a Swiss Army knife. People begin to gather around you. A couple settles down on the far end, talking quietly. Their heads close. An older man eases onto the platform with a groan and then sighs in relief when his back touches the wall. Two children tumble in after him, and wedge themselves between grown bodies without anyone protesting. You notice that no one is trying to sleep alone. It is not just social custom, it is physics. Bodies radiate heat. Your skin warms the air right around you. If you lay alone, that warm halo drifts away. If you lay close to others, your halos overlap, and the collective warmth climbs faster. The platform becomes a quilt made of people. You slide over to make space, and immediately you feel the benefit. One person's shoulder against yours is not intrusive here. It is comforting. Their breath warms your upper arm. The fur draped over both of you becomes more effective because it is covering a larger, shared heat source. You can almost think of the bed as a small island of living temperature inside the house. Outside the island, cold rules. On the island, heat is made and guarded. You notice how the platform is positioned. It hugs the wall but is not pressed into it. There is just enough gap for bedding to tuck and air to move. The wall behind you is not icy. It is a slow, stored warmth that has been soaking in hearth heat all evening. Resting your back against it feels like leaning on a giant, patient hot stone. The platform height is also tuned to the room, not too high to catch the thickest smoke, not too low to take floor chill. It is a sweet spot shaped by trial and error over centuries. A woman unrolls a long blanket, then folds it so the thicker part is under the hips. She pats the bedding twice like she is fluffing a pillow. You watch closely, because her movements have that quiet, competent calm of someone who has survived many winters. She is not making a nest for luxury. She is building a thermal trap. Straw first for insulation, wool for warmth even when damp, fur on top to block drafts, then a cloak or another blanket over the shoulders. The order matters. You follow her example and get your own layers arranged. While you do, you catch a glance of something small and wooden tucked into the bedding near the corner. It is a little carved block with a hollow in it and a strip of cloth tied around. One of the kids explains in a whisper that it is used to hold a warm stone in place so it doesn't roll and burn anyone. That is such a specific, practical piece of bedtime gear that you smile. Not every household has a carved stone holder like that, and you can't call it universal, but it shows a playful ingenuity in the small corners of Viking life. People fiddled, invented, and adapted right down to the problem of hot stones escaping in the night. The hall quiets more. Some people are already wrapping themselves tight. Others are still murmuring, their voices soft as wool. You notice that the platform near the high seat is fuller of furs and thicker blankets. Status still maps itself onto bedding. The chieftain's family does not sleep in a separate palace wing, but they do sleep on better layers. And yet, in a blizzard, hierarchy is a thin line. Everyone is subject to the same cold if the fire fails. That shared risk is one reason the hall feels like a single organism. Your breathing slows and you sink down. The platform creaks under the shifting weight of bodies, a sound like an old ship settling against a dock. You realize how much this arrangement demands trust. You are sleeping with people close enough that if someone has a bad dream and flails, you will feel it. Close enough that lice, if they are around, can hop easily. Close enough that privacy is a myth. But the Vikings valued survival over solitude. Besides, in a world where the long, dark winter is as much an enemy as any raider, closeness can feel like a form of armor. There is still some uncertainty about just how rigidly these sleeping zones were assigned. Researchers working from sagas and house layouts debate whether platforms were strictly divided by family, gender, and rank, or whether winter storms forced more flexible mixing. Some readings of social norms suggest clear bays for households. Other evidence implies people shifted positions depending on the season, the guest list, and the needs of warmth. The truth may be both. Rules exist, and then blizzards happen. Tonight, you can see the rule, but you can also see people squeezing where it makes sense. Heat makes its own logic. A man near you reaches down and tucks a rolled blanket along the edge of the platform like a barrier. You realize he is blocking a draft that wants to snake up from the floor. That little rolled edge also keeps stray sparks from reaching bedding if one pops from the hearth. The platform is not just a bed, it is a defended perimeter. You are sleeping on the rampart of a small winter fortress. As you settle, you notice a subtle rhythm. People do not all lie down at once. They trickle into sleep. First, the children's breathing deepens, quick and soft. Then the elders settle, their joints finding a position they can tolerate. Then the adults let their shoulders drop. This gradual sinking is part of keeping the hall calm. If everyone thrashed at once, bedding would shift, sparks might fly, and the whole system would feel less stable. Sleep here is communal etiquette. You think about how different this is from your modern bedtime, locked in a private room, maybe with a white noise machine and a door you can close to the world. Here the world is inside with you. That could feel overwhelming, but as the minutes pass, you feel the opposite. The closeness makes you drowsy, human heat and human sound, and the shared certainty that someone is nearby if you wake in terror. The hall is a cradle of overlapping lives. The blizzard roar is still there, but now it seems far away, like something happening to another planet. The walls have done their work, the roof has done its work, the hearth has done its work, and now the sleeping platforms do theirs, turning the longhouse from survival shelter into a place where your body can finally switch off. Your cheek rests against wool. It is scratchy for a second, then it becomes a texture you stop noticing. The fur over your shoulders is heavy in the nicest way, like a weighted blanket designed by a bear. You feel someone's elbow gently press into your ribs as they adjust. No apology. No need. You shift too, and the platform creaks again, then stills. You let your eyes close. The last thing you register is the quiet, steady warmth climbing between bodies and bedding, and the thought that this is what winter sleep looks like without fireplaces. Not a single source of comfort, but a whole architecture of shared heat, raised wood, layered straw, and people who know how to lie close when the sky turns into knives. Your breathing matches the hall's breathing. You are on the platform now, inside the storm, and safe enough to drift. You are half settled on the platform when you feel a new kind of warmth rising, not from the hearth, not from the person pressed lightly against your shoulder, but from below and nearby. At first it's subtle, like you're imagining it. Then you notice the rhythm, a soft shuffle, a quiet snort, the faintest clack of hoof on packed earth. You open your eyes a little and look toward the dim end of the longhouse, where the animals stand in their corner, the bare space that shares this roof with you. Their presence is not decorative, it is not sentimental, it is winter strategy with a heartbeat. In the flicker of ember light, you can make out a cow's broad flank, a sheep's woolly bulk, a goat's narrow face, all breathing slow clouds into the air that you and your neighbors will also breathe. They aren't tucked away in a barn across the yard because in a blizzard that barn could be a death trap. Wind could tear at it, drifts could block its door, predators could follow the storm like a shadow. So the animals come in with you, and you share warmth the way you share everything else in winter. A lot of longhouses, especially in Norway, Sweden, and the North Atlantic settlements, were built as combined living and biostructures, where people and livestock occupied the same building, often separated by a low partition or a slightly lower floor area for the animals. Excavations show this layout clearly, with manure layers and stall features at one end and domestic activity at the other. That arrangement is a basic, widely accepted point about rural Viking life. You might wrinkle your nose in modern disgust, but it is hard to argue with the physics. A cow gives off as much heat as a small stove just by existing. A few of them, plus sheep and goats, can lift the indoor temperature in a meaningful way, especially during the deep cold. You shift your legs, and you feel that warmth again, as if the longhouse floor is a giant, slow radiator. The animal end is slightly lower, and you can sense how warm air from there creeps upward, pushed gently by their bodies and breath. Heat rises. It spreads. It finds the platforms along the walls. You're not sleeping on top of the animals, but you are sleeping in their thermal neighborhood, and you can feel it. The smell is unmistakable. It is hay and animal skin, and a sweet, sour edge of manure. It might sound unpleasant, but in the way your body relaxes, you realize your brain is filing it under safe. Animals mean wealth. Animals mean milk, meat, wool, leather, and fertilizer for spring fields. On a blizzard night, animals also mean warmth and a kind of company that does not ask questions. Their sound is part of the lullaby here. An occasional chew, a slow exhale, a hoof scraping as one shifts its weight. It's like sleeping beside a quiet engine. Someone near you pulls a blanket down to cover their feet more fully, and that makes you notice another practical detail. The platforms are higher than the animal floor, but not isolated from it. Warmth from below reaches you most at your legs and feet, the parts that cool fastest. People knew this. They arranged their sleeping positions with animal heat in mind. Feet toward the byre end if you can manage it, head away from the draft, body angled to catch the rising warmth without catching the strongest smell. It is a whole invisible geometry of comfort. You think about the cold you felt earlier on the earthen floor. If you were sleeping down there, even with straw, The ground would sap your heat slowly all night. Up on the bench, you are insulated, and below and near you, the animals create a second layer of defense, warming the air and, through that air, warming the building materials. The longhouse is a heat web. Every warm body contributes. A kid on the platform beside you whispers that the cow is named something like White Ear, and that she gets grumpy if she can't see the hearth. The kid says this as though that matters to the cow's mood, and therefore to everyone's night. You smile into the darkness. It's a little humanizing, but also a reminder that these are not anonymous heat machines. They are individuals within the household sphere. That closeness shapes how people treat them. They are inside your home, so you watch them, you listen to them, you live with them as neighbors. There's another angle to this, too. Keeping animals indoors was not only about warmth, it helped protect them from raiders or wolves, and it kept them from wandering into snowdrifts and breaking legs. But warmth is the part you feel most clearly now. You imagine the long, darker centuries later, in rural Scandinavia, where this exact arrangement continues. You have heard stories about farmhouses where you could hear cows breathing through the wall. It's not a Viking invention that disappears. It's a cold climate solution that sticks around because it works. You listen harder and pick up a low, almost humming sound. Not a song, not a human voice, but a kind of satisfied animal rumble. It is oddly soothing. Your eyelids feel heavier. Your own breath slows to match the pace of the hall. The byre end is like a warm tide pool. Even if you don't go there, you float on its influence. Then your mind stumbles over a small oddity. Against the partition, close to the animals, you see a shallow wooden trough filled with what looks like dried seaweed and straw scraps. An older man explains quietly that in the worst storms, some households would throw extra bedding or seaweed down near the byre to keep the animals warmer and drier, and the animals would in turn stay calmer. He adds, almost offhand, that sometimes a favourite lamb or a newborn calf might be brought closer to the human side if it was weak. This folds into a stranger, more tender kind of winter practice. People used the warmth of their bodies to save livestock, and then relied on the livestock's warmth to save themselves. That mutual rescue is your slightly quirky detail for this section. It's practical love, if that phrase can exist. You turn back to your own spot, and you can feel the animal's breath in the overall air. Their exhalations add humidity, which could be a problem if the hall were cold. Damp air steals heat. But because there is a hearth burning and smoke drying the rafters, the moisture balances with warmth, rather than turning to clammy chill. It is another delicate equilibrium you might not have expected. Too many animals in too little ventilation could make air heavy and unhealthy. Too few animals and you lose a precious heat source. The household is always measuring without numbers, sensing with skin and nose. You start wondering, while drifting toward sleep again, about the exact division between human and animal space. Some longhouses show clear physical separations, others appear more blended. There is still an open question among researchers about how consistently people kept a strict barrier, especially in smaller farms or during extreme weather. Some interpretations suggest animals were penned tightly in a dedicated end, with humans never crossing the line except to tend them. Other readings allow for more fluid movement, maybe even animals coming into the open hall in the worst cold. The evidence gives different pictures depending on place and time. So the debate is not whether animals were inside at all, because we know they often were, but rather how intimate that indoor mingling became on nights when the temperature tried to kill everything it touched. The goat bleats once, sharp and sudden, and the woman near you clicks her tongue. The goat settles back to quiet. Even the animals seem to understand the rules of blizzard night. You can almost feel their nervousness too. Animals react to pressure changes, wind noise, the strange way snow seems to swallow all outside sound. Their calm matters, because a panicked cow could knock over a partition, spill feed, or make the whole hall jump awake. So people tend them before bed, giving them enough hay, checking their hooves, smoothing their nerves, the way you might smooth a child's hair. You see someone do that now. A quick hand on a cow's neck, a low murmur, and the cow settles into the kind of heavy stillness that radiates warmth. You consider the byre floor. It's cud and straw and trampled earth. It's warmer than the human floor because bodies are on it all day. The manure layer itself can generate a little heat as it breaks down. A slow compost warmth. You don't have to love that fact to respect it. The medieval world was good at turning waste into survival without calling it sustainability. Here the animal's end is both heater and fertilizer factory, and no one finds that weird. it's just the cycle. Sleep keeps pulling you like a tide. The sounds of the hall soften. The animal's breathing becomes a steadier, deeper tempo. You feel your feet warming in a way that doesn't happen with a hearth alone. You realize that a fireplace on a wall would never have given you this kind of whole-room warmth. The bioheat is gentle and constant, like having a slow-burning stove with no fuel cost besides feeding the beast. Your thoughts slow, and a kind of peace settles in. You are sharing a roof with animals who do not care about your worries, and somehow that makes the night less sharp. You picture the blizzard outside again, the white blindness, the danger of getting lost 10 steps from home. And then you picture this hall, with its thick walls, its banked fire, its human nest on the benches, and its livestock breathing warmth into the dark. You understand that Viking winter sleep is not one trick. It is a whole orchestra of small, sensible choices. And tonight, the animals are playing the low, steady notes. You let your eyes close fully now. The last thing you register is the soft, animal heat rising like a hidden blanket under the longhouse, and the quiet gratitude in your body for sharing the night with creatures who keep you alive without even trying. You wake for a moment in the middle of the night, not fully awake, just drifting up as if the storm tugged a thread attached to your ribs. The hall is darker now. The hearth is a low red eye in the center, barely open. The blizzard's voice outside has softened into a constant shushing, like waves scraping a shore made of ice. You can't see your breath, which feels like a victory. And then you feel the real reason you're okay. The layers on you, the quiet weight. The wool, stacked and wrapped, and doing its unglamorous miracle work. You shift under your coverings and notice how many things you're wearing even in bed. A thick tunic that feels like a blanket on its own. Linen underneath that keeps scratchiness from going straight to your skin. Woolen leggings that stay on because the idea of bare legs against winter air is ridiculous here. Socks, maybe in 2 layers, one finer, one coarser. A cloak pulled over your shoulders like a portable wall. You are not sleeping in pajamas. You are sleeping in your day armor. And you're learning quickly that this is not overkill. It is the normal state of being here. Wool is everywhere in the Viking world. Sheep were a backbone of rural life, providing meat, milk, and most importantly, fiber. Loom weights, spindle walls, and textile fragments found in Viking Age sites show a thriving wool economy, with garments that could be thick, tightly woven, and remarkably warm. That's a solid, well-supported point about daily life. Wool was not a luxury item reserved for heroes in sagas. It was the default survival fabric. It keeps heat, even when damp. It breathes enough to reduce sweat, and it can be mended endlessly. You understand why people in this hall trust wool more than they trust the weather. You press your fingers into the cloth on your chest. It's dense, slightly oily. The lanolin smell is still there, faintly sheepy, mixed with smoke. That oil matters. It helps repel moisture, which is half the war in winter. Wet clothes steal heat fast. Dry, lanolin-rich wool slows that theft. Even if snow blows in and melts on your cloak, the wool still insulates. It isn't magic, but it behaves like it. You think about your modern wardrobe. Cotton hoodie, maybe. Cotton socks. Cotton feels nice, but it's a sponge when wet. Here cotton would be a liability. Wool is more like a smart sponge, holding a little moisture without collapsing into cold. You can feel the difference already. Your outer layers are a shield against drafts. Your inner layers are a buffer against your own sweat. The Vikings did not have synthetic fleece. They had a deep familiarity with how to build warmth using animals and time. You become more aware of layering as a practice, not an accident. The woman beside you earlier wore a shift, then a tunic, then a heavy apron-like dress, then a cloak. The man near the high seat had a thick wool coat and a hat pulled low. Kids were wrapped in wool so thick they looked like walking rolls of bread. Each layer traps air. Still air is warmth. Moving air is cold. So you create little air pockets between cloth and skin, cloth and cloth, cloth and cloak, and by the time the wind tries to reach you, it has to fight through a maze of trapped heat. The genius of wool is how adjustable it is. Too hot, you open the cloak or kick off a layer. Too cold, you tuck it back. You don't need a thermostat, you need awareness. You can see people doing this even in their sleep, half conscious, pulling a mantle higher when the wind shifts, loosening it when the hearth flares a bit. Your own body is doing tiny corrections without asking your brain's permission. Your hand finds the edge of a mantle. It's heavy enough that it stays where you put it, unlike a flimsy sheet that slides away. That weight is part of comfort. It presses you down into a stable little climate. You feel held. You also feel a certain itch, because wool can be scratchy if it's not softened. But even the itch fades into background, because warmth is the priority. Besides, people here know tricks to make wool kinder: a smoother linen underlayer, a rubbed-in fat or oil. Time and wear. You remember that earlier. You saw someone spinning cord by the hearth. Wool production never stops. Winter is weaving season. While the wind rages, people twist thread, repair cloaks, patch holes. Textiles are too valuable to waste, and a hole in a cloak is not a fashion flaw. It is a gateway for cold. You glance down the platform and see a cloak draped over a sleeping child, patched in 3 places with different shades of brown. It looks like a map of old winters. Each patch is a night survived. A small sound makes you smile. One of the kids mumbles in sleep and tugs their cloak tighter, then relaxes again. You think about the way wool also muffles sound. It softens footsteps. It turns the hall into a quieter place. On a storm night, that quiet is almost as important as warmth. You don't want sharp noises waking the whole platform, so layers do double duty. They keep heat in and keep peace in. There's a slightly odd corner of this textile world you notice near your head. Someone has tucked a little pouch under their pillow. It smells faintly of dried herbs. The older woman earlier mentioned juniper smoke. Now you realize people also slip herbs into clothing or bedding. Some do it for scent, some for comfort, and some because they believe it can ward off illness or nightmares. You catch the smell of sweet gale or maybe yarrow. Hard to tell in the smoky air. Herbal pouches and scented inserts show up in later Scandinavian folk practice, and it's plausible that similar habits existed in Viking communities, especially around sleep. That's your quirky human detail for this section. Even when you're wrapped in practical wool, you still want a little softness for your mind. You feel your own clothing and discover something else. The seams are strong, stitched with care. Vikings prized good tailoring, not in the runway sense, but in the sense that a well-cut garment moves with you and seals your heat. A loose tunic lets drafts swirl inside. A snug one holds warmth closer. Archaeological finds from places like Hedeby and Burka show garments with surprisingly sophisticated cuts, including gauze and fitted sleeves meant to allow motion without wasting cloth. These aren't sloppy sacks. They're engineered layers. You think about color now. Even in this dim light, you can spot blues, reds, browns. Some dyes come from imported materials, some from local plants. Dyed wool can signal status, but more importantly, it signals that textiles are not only for survival. People are making beauty in the middle of hardship, yet no one here is sacrificing warmth for style. The wool cloak is thick first, decorative second. If it's both, great. If not, warmth wins. Your eyes drift shut again, but your mind keeps a gentle hum, the way it does when you're cozy and half dreaming. You wonder if people ever slept nude in this culture. It seems absurd in this climate, and the evidence backs that up. Most likely, people slept in some form of clothing, maybe shedding a heavy outer cloak if the hall was warm enough, but keeping inner wool layers on. Nakedness is for summer, or for a brief moment by the hearth, not for blizzard nights. The clothes are your second skin and your second wall. There is still a lively discussion about how fine or coarse everyday wool was across different communities. Some sites show very fine, tightly woven textiles that would feel almost soft to you. Other evidence suggests coarser, hairier cloth was common among working households. The question is whether coarse wool was simply what most people had, or whether finer cloth was more widespread than we assume because it decays less in the ground. We know elite graves contain beautiful fabrics, but ordinary life leaves fewer traces. So the texture of a typical winter cloak is something experts still juggle with, balancing fragmentary evidence and later tradition. If you could time travel with a shopping bag, you'd be a hero to textile historians. You listen to the wind again, smoothing itself along the roof. The hall is steady, but winter is never fully steady. A little draft might snake under the door, the fire might dip, someone might wake to pee and let cold air in. So your warmth cannot depend on the room alone. It must sit on you. That's the central truth of layering. You become a moving shelter. You don't need to chase the hearth every time the air shifts. Your own clothing handles the shift first. You tuck the cloak higher on your shoulders and feel that heat pocket expand. Your body is a furnace, and your clothes are the walls that keep the heat from escaping. It's simple, almost boring, which is why it works. No dramatic heroics, just wool and knowledge in the hands of people who lived inside winter for generations. Somebody near the edge of the platform coughs softly, a reminder that smoke and wool and animals create a complicated air, yet even that cough fades, and the hall returns to quiet. The sound of wool rustling as someone adjusts, the soft thump of a sheep settling off in the byre, the distant murmur of wind. It's a steady, sleepy soundtrack. You let yourself sink deeper. You feel the layered cloth along your arms, legs, chest, a whole second environment hugging you. You can picture how, if you had to get up suddenly and step into the cold, you'd already be dressed to survive. There's no scrambling for clothes in an emergency. The line between sleeping and living is thin here, and wool is what makes that thin line safe. Your thoughts slow, the scratchiness disappears, the weight turns into comfort, the storm becomes background. You are wrapped in portable weather, the kind you can carry even when the world outside is trying to erase all warmth, and you drift back down into sleep, grateful for sheep you've never met, and for hands that learned long ago how to spin winter into thread. You sink deeper into the bedding, and now you become aware of textures beyond wool, as if the platform itself is gently nudging you to notice the next layer of Viking winter wisdom. Fur brushes your fingertips, thick and glossy, warmer than anything woven. Somewhere near your shoulder, a feather-stuffed quilt rustles softly each time the person beside you shifts. These aren't decorative luxuries. They're the final defenses between your body and the cold, the last line of comfort once the fire has faded and the longhouse has given all the warmth it can. You gather a handful of fur in your palm, feeling its dense underlayer and sleek guard hairs. It smells faintly of smoke and earth, and a bit of animal musk that even washing can't fully erase. This isn't the faux fur of modern winters. It is the real hide of a creature that once walked through snowstorms harsher than the one battering the longhouse tonight. Viking communities relied heavily on animal skins, not just for clothing but for bedding. Excavations and textual references point toward households possessing an assortment of hides from sheep, goats, cattle, reindeer, and sometimes fox or bear. Using fur for sleep wasn't a mark of extravagance. It was practical logic born from a world where night temperatures could drop low enough to freeze water indoors. You pull the fur over your shoulders and feel warmth bloom almost instantly. Furs trap heat with a competence that still astonishes modern people. The hollow hairs on some animals, especially reindeer, act like tiny insulated tubes. Combined with the skin's natural density, they form a cocoon that your body can heat and maintain with minimal effort. You get why some northern cultures continued sleeping in furs well into the modern era. When life is on winter's edge, luxury is whatever lets you wake up alive. Next to you, someone tugs at a large quilt. At first you think it's wool, but when they settle it across a child's body, you hear a softer sound, a faint sigh of compressed feathers. Viking quilts haven't survived in abundance because organic stuffing decays quickly, but there are tantalizing hints in later Scandinavian traditions and a handful of archaeological traces suggesting feather bedding existed in some households, likely among the better off. Feathers are a clever use of bird resources in a culture that hunted seabirds and kept fowl. The quilt is lighter than the fur but holds heat differently. It makes a little cloud of warmth, like a soft air pocket hugging the sleeper. You feel the contrast immediately when part of the feather quilt brushes your hand. It's a different kind of comfort. Fur is assertive, heavy, certain. Feathers are gentle, almost airy. Between them, people built a layered system, tailored to whatever the night demanded. If you had a fever or a chill, a feather quilt might be used. If you needed deep, lasting warmth against a storm, fur was king. It is strange to think that thousands of years before the idea of a winter duvet, people already understood how to blend materials for the perfect sleep. At the foot of the platform you spot a wild-looking patchwork of hides. A man rolls it out, and you notice that it's stitched together from scraps of different animals. Some pieces are smooth, some are shaggy, some are dyed with streaks of faded red. This kind of multi-hide blanket shows up in reenactment studies and textile comparisons. It suggests that poorer households or frugal ones often used every salvageable inch of hide, sewing small pieces into larger bedding. In a world where nothing is thrown away lightly, even the scraps become tonight's warmth. You press your toes under the edge of a fur and feel immediate gratitude that someone took the time to stitch those fragments into something coherent. Your ear picks up a low conversation between two older women preparing their bedding at the far side. Their voices drop to a near whisper, not because they want secrecy, but because people naturally lower their volume when the hall moves towards sleep. One mutters about the fur being too new and too slick to stay put. The other laughs and says the trick is to sew little loops on the underside so it can be tied to the platform edge. You imagine this improvised engineering, a kind of winter bed hacking common in cultures that rely heavily on loose hides. It's the sort of detail that rarely shows up in written sources, but fits beautifully with everyday survival logic. Then a peculiar detail catches your eye. A small amulet carved from bone hangs at the corner of one blanket. It's shaped like a little fish, worn smooth by years of fingers worrying at it. A young woman sees you looking and explains softly that it was her grandmother's sleep token. She says, the old woman believed it kept the cold spirits out of dreams. Whether or not the Vikings had the exact same belief is hard to prove, but many northern cultures held superstitions about cold creeping into the mind as well as the body. A trinket on bedding feels like one of those small folk practices that slip through historical cracks, yet ring true in human behavior. It is your odd, tender, little footnote of the night. You stretch your legs again, letting the hides settle. The bedding is warm now, but you know it didn't start that way. Every night the household must warm their own sleep environment, turning cold materials into a refuge. That takes a little time and a little trust that the layers will hold, and tonight they do. You can feel the warmth spreading through the fur, traveling across your chest and arms, building in the straw beneath. This whole layered system feels like a breathing creature. There is still the question of what exactly counts as standard Viking bedding. Scholars continue to examine textile fragments, animal hides, and impressions in soil to piece together what was typical. Some think most people slept with straw and wool alone, reserving furs for travel and emergencies. Others argue that hides were commonplace and abundant, making them obvious for bedding. The reality probably varied from place to place, wealth to wealth, and winter to winter. Evidence is patchy, but your body in this moment gives its own answer. Any household that could afford a fur or two would never choose to sleep without them on a night like this. The longhouse quiets even more. The fire has dwindled to embers, but the platform is finally warm enough that you don't miss the flames. You listen to the tiny movements of bedding. Someone folds a fur edge. Someone frees a trapped foot. Someone exhales, and their breath rustles a feather-filled quilt. You can imagine how morning will smell. The furs will absorb a bit of sweat and a bit of smoke, but they'll still feel like allies. Later, people will drape them over beams to air them out, shaking dust and ash back to the earth floor. Bedding maintenance is winter's chore, because damp or moldy hides can become dangerous. But tonight the furs are dry and warm, and you trust them without thinking. A draft slips across your cheek as someone enters briefly through the doorway. Cold air crawls along the floor, searching. But your bedding holds. You curl deeper into it, understanding suddenly how fundamental this layering is. Without furs, the longhouse could keep you alive. With furs, it can let you rest. There's a huge difference between survival and sleep. And Vikings, for all their iron-hard reputations, needed their sleep badly. Your eyes slip closed, but before sleep claims you again, you think about how strange it is that something as simple as a fur turned into a symbol of status, warmth, and even affection. A good hide takes time, skill, and respect for the animal. A well-made quilt takes hours of hands pulling feathers and stitching cloth. Bedding is not an afterthought, it is an artifact of care. You shift one last time, pulling the fur up to your chin. The storm is still out there, clawing the world into white, but you feel none of it. You feel warmth like a living thing, a shelter inside a shelter, straw under you, wool on you, fur over you, feather near you, all of it shaped by a culture that mastered winter, not by fighting it, but by learning how to sleep inside it. And with that, you drift again, held by ancient fabrics, old instincts, and the quiet that only a well-layered bed can bring. You come awake again only a little, the soft kind of waking where your eyes don't bother to open but your senses wander outward. The hall is still dark, still warm, still a nest of quiet breathing, but something has changed. Your cheek has shifted against the bedding, and now you feel the soft rasp of straw beneath the wool and fur. It crackles faintly, a dry whisper that seems to hum along with the winter sounds. You lift your head an inch, and your fingers brush the straw layer, and instantly you understand why it matters so much in this world. Straw isn't glamorous. It isn't soft like fur or warm like wool. but it is one of the oldest and most reliable sleeping foundations in northern climates. Longhouses almost always use straw or hay on their platforms, replenished when needed, flattened into a forgiving, slightly springy mat. Across many excavated longhouse sites, impressions of plant fibers and compacted organic layers reveal exactly this practice. Straw creates a barrier between your body and the cold wooden platform, absorbing moisture, trapping air, and adding just enough give to make the bed feel alive rather than rigid. You shift again and feel the way the straw adjusts under you. It is like lying on a field that remembers summer. It smells faintly golden, warm even in winter, carrying a note of dried sunshine that no storm can erase. That scent alone is comforting. It is the scent of stored harvests, of livestock feed, of long days when snow was only an idea. Straw carries memory, and somehow that memory warms the mind as well as the body. Hay is a slightly different matter. It's greener, richer, and usually saved for animals, not bedding. But sometimes, if straw is short or if comfort is desperately needed, people mix in hay or dried grasses. You catch a sharper, almost sweet green edge under your nose and realize there is a bit of hay in this bedding too. Not enough to waste precious winter feed, but enough to soften the layer. Straw for structure, hay for comfort. A simple equation, but one felt in your bones. The bedding rustles beside you as someone turns. That sound, small and crisp, reminds you that straw is more than just padding. It is insulation. Each stalk forms a tiny hollow tube of trapped air. Trapped air means warmth. An entire bed of trapped air means survival. In other words, your bed is a huge, natural insulator, built from the ground up. Literally, you slide your hand deeper into the layer, feeling how dry it is. That dryness is crucial, because damp straw is misery. Damp straw chills the spine. Damp straw molds. Damp straw announces that winter has found a way inside. But here the straw is crisp and fresh because the longhouse has done its job. The fire dried the air earlier. The smoke has chased off unwanted moisture. Even the animal's heat keeps humidity from settling too deeply. A well-tended longhouse can support dry bedding even in the worst storm. The woman nearest you mutters something in her sleep and kicks her foot back under the covers, jostling the straw. You notice how the straw shifts toward the wall, filling small gaps, sealing tiny drafts that creep along the edges of the platform. That's not an accident. People spread the straw with care, making sure it rises slightly toward the wall to block cold seams. Bedding is architecture in miniature. Every handful of straw becomes another brick in the fortress of sleep. Then your fingers graze something unexpected. A tiny, dried sprig of heather tucked accidentally or intentionally among the straw. Its scent is faint but distinct, a dusty floral note that surprises you. When you ask the older man waking lightly beside you about it, he chuckles softly. He says that sometimes people toss aromatic plants into bedding for comfort or luck, especially in winter. Heather, meadowsweet, even dried pine needles. Anything to freshen the bed and make the long dark more pleasant. There's a gentle eccentricity to that detail, a reminder that even the most practical cultures enjoyed small sensory joys. You settle back and now think about the ritual of bedding maintenance. Straw doesn't last forever. It gets crushed. It gathers dust and hair. It can develop odors. So households regularly replaced or fluffed it, usually during calmer winter spells or after feasts when cleaning was expected. That practice is noted indirectly in later rural Scandinavian traditions, and archaeologists infer it from layered bedding deposits. You picture people lifting hides, sweeping aside old straw, spreading new armfuls across the platform until the bed looks fresh again. In winter, that would be a chore done with cold fingers, but one no one would skip. Lying here, you notice something else. Straw has sound, a pleasant, subtle sound, a rasp when someone shifts, a sigh when a blanket settles. The noise is tiny but rhythmic, soothing in a strange way. In a storm night, soothing sounds matter. You want a bed that responds to your movement quietly, softly, organically. Straw does that. Wood creaks, fur rustles, straw whispers. Together they make a soundscape that helps lull you, a kind of natural white noise layered beneath the storm's roar. A draft slips under the door again, sending a thin tendril of cold gliding across the floor. It never reaches your core. The straw stops it, insulates against it, and the furs above hold that warmth in place. You marvel at how much insulation is achieved through layered simplicity. Straw below, wool around, fur above. A human burrito engineered long before bedding, Science became a thing. The air shifts again when someone gets up briefly, stepping down from the platform with a soft crunch of straw underfoot. You watch their silhouette cross the hall, a blanket around their shoulders, heading to check the embers. The moment the bed loses their weight, the straw rises slightly, puffing back into place. It's self-adjusting in the quietest way. You understand why bedding like this lasted centuries. It's renewable, forgiving, and easy to shape. If someone new comes to sleep with the family, you just spread the straw further. If someone leaves, you fluff it back. If a baby is born, you make a little nest in the curve of the adult's bedding. But straw is not all sunshine. You know there must have been pests sometimes. Small insects, the occasional mouse nibbling through the layer. And you imagine the work of keeping bedding clean and sanitary in a world without laundromats. Yet the smoke in the longhouse acts as a mild deterrent. The dry heat keeps mold at bay, and people were simply used to a tolerance level that modern sleepers would not accept. It's humbling, and also strangely comforting, to feel a bed made from such elemental materials and realize it still works. Scholars continue to explore how bedding varied across status and region. Some believe wealthier households might have used more wool padding or imported textiles instead of relying heavily on straw. Others argue that straw was universal because it was cheap, effective, and readily available each harvest. The evidence remains incomplete, leaving room for interpretation. But lying here, with your back warming against the wall and your body sinking into the straw's gentle give, you feel that straw belongs here, not as a compromise, but as a foundation. You close your eyes again and let the scent of dried grass settle over you. It's unimaginably peaceful, considering the fury outside. You can imagine how, in warmer seasons, the straw would carry hints of the fields, reminding people of haying days, of sunlight on the earth, of work done together. In winter, that memory would be a blessing. Even now you can sense it working on you, softening the dread of the storm's noise. Your fingers stroke the straw again, and your body knows the truth. Without it, this platform would be hard, cold, and uninviting. With it, the longhouse becomes a cradle carved from earth, wood, and harvest. You are lying in a bed made from summer's leftovers, protected from winter's sharp teeth. The wind cries again outside, a high, lonely sound. But inside you feel cushioned, held, anchored by something as simple as dried stalks. Straw is not noble, but it is honest, tireless, and loyal. And tonight, it is the quiet hero of your sleep. You draw your blanket closer and let the straw's warm rustle carry you deeper into rest, sinking into a bed that breathes with the rhythm of the old year, steady and sure beneath you. You drift in and out of that warm, straw-scented sleep until a faint movement nudges you awake. Not loud, not urgent, just a soft shuffle near the hearth, as someone tends to something small and glowing. You blink your eyes open, and at first all you see is the deep red heart of the fire. No longer flames, only coals pulsing like slow breathing. The night inside the longhouse is thick and still, yet the air has a pocket of heat that doesn't match the dying hearth. You shift, confused, until a warm bulk brushes against your ankle. A heated stone, wrapped in cloth. You lift the edge of your blanket and see the rounded shape tucked neatly near your feet. Someone must have slid it in during your half-sleep, maybe the older man or woman moving quietly a few breaths ago. The warmth radiates through the fabric, steady and comforting. It's like the earliest version of the hot water bottle, long before rubber existed, long before metal kettles hummed on stoves. Vikings simply heated stones in the fire, then wrapped them in wool, leather, or leftover cloth. A practice so straightforward it almost disappears into everyday life. Yet it's brilliant. Stones retain heat slowly, releasing it for hours. On a night like this, one warm stone at the foot of the bed can shift your whole sleep from shivering into genuine rest. You touch the cloth wrap. It's coarse wool, tied loosely to keep the stone from burning its way out. Your fingertips register the slow thrum of heat, the kind that seeps into your bones rather than blasting at you like a fire. The stone must have been chosen carefully. Too small, and it would cool too quickly. Too large, and it would be impossible to move safely. There were rules the household followed instinctively. Choose river stones when possible, because they heat evenly. Avoid stones that crack. Watch for stray sparks while removing them from embers. These little household sciences rarely appear in written sagas, but archaeological hearth setups and tool remnants hint at them, and the icy climates practically guarantee their use. You shift your feet closer, savoring the radiance. The heat travels up your legs, carrying a deep kind of comfort. This is not the showy warmth of a roaring fire. This is the quiet, intimate warmth that belongs to the bed itself. You imagine many families perfecting this nightly ritual, each household with its own preferred stones, its own wrapping cloths, its own rhythms of heating and cooling, passing down knowledge the way some modern families pass down recipes or bedtime stories. Across the hall, someone kneels at the hearth, scraping ashes aside with a long iron tool. They stop now and then, checking the glow. Then, with practiced fingers, they nudge a small cluster of embers into a tighter mound. This is more than tending a dying fire. It is preparation for later. Embers buried under ash can last for hours, sometimes all night. Come morning, they will spark the day's fire quickly, without wasting precious tinder. This method of banking the fire shows up in many cold climate cultures, and Viking households were no exception. You feel the practicality shaping every detail of the night. The person at the hearth leans over a small wooden box beside them. When your eyes adjust, you realize it's filled with half-charred sticks, fuel the storm couldn't steal. They pick one up, test its weight, then tuck it beside the coals, not to ignite yet, but to warm for later. You can sense their calculation even from across the hall. Too much heat now could make smoke billow dangerously, or dry out the bedding nearest the hearth. Too little heat, and the hall will cool rapidly, forcing everyone to wake and crowd around the fire. So they choose a careful, middle path. Preserve heat in objects, not in the open air. Near your platform, the older woman from earlier rolls something small in a leather pouch. When she loosens the flap, you see a compact ball of glowing material, dried fungus or punky wood, the kind that smolders rather than flames. It's tinder for emergencies, something that can carry a spark safely for hours. She checks it briefly, then tucks it back away. The Vikings understood fire intimately, not romantically, intimately. They lived with its moods. They shaped their nights around its needs. You hear someone whisper to a child nearby, explaining the warm stone you share. The child giggles and says their family sometimes warmed 2 stones, one for the feet, one to hold against the stomach. The whisperer adds that some people even placed a warm stone near their chest to help with winter coughing. You picture it a rough, ancient version of a heating pad. It makes perfect sense. Warmth loosens muscles, calms breath, comforts a tired heart. You wonder how many winter nights across centuries were eased by one well-chosen rock. A slightly mischievous detail catches your attention. Near the hearth, someone has placed a curved horn upside down in the ashes. When they lift it, steam curls from inside. The horn is filled with hot water, not for drinking, but for heating the hands and face before sleep. Horns don't crack as easily as pottery in sudden temperature shifts, and their shape makes them easy to cradle. It's not universal evidence, but hints from a few finds and later northern folk practices suggest that heated containers, horns, cups, even small stones played supporting roles in bedtime comfort. You taste the air again. The smoke is gentler now, pushed higher by the faint funnel of warmth created by heated stones, embers, and warm bodies. The longhouse seems to breathe with you, each inhalation pulling cool air from crevices, each exhalation sending heat upward to the smoke hole. The balance remains delicate. Some researchers still debate how extensively Viking households relied on ember preservation methods and heated objects through the night. Without written manuals, we piece together clues from hearth designs, char patterns, ethnographic parallels, and logic shaped by climate. But your body, lying here with warm stones under the blankets, answers the question instinctively. Of course they used them. Of course they mastered these micro-techniques of warmth. Without them, blizzard nights would be unbearable. You curl your toes again and feel the warm pulse from the wrapped stone. Someone shifts beside you, brushing your arm with a blanket warmed by another hidden stone. You can sense these pockets of heat scattered across the platform like tiny hearths. It is strangely beautiful. Each one a spark of care placed intentionally for someone to find in the night. These stones are not dramatic survival tools. They are quiet ones, the kind that slip into memory more than myth. They sit at the edge of history, too ordinary to be celebrated, too essential to be forgotten. The storm growls again outside. A gust dumps a faint shower of snow grains through the smoke hole. They melt before reaching the hearth, sizzling faintly when they hit a glowing ember. Yet you stay completely warm. The stone at your feet guards the coldest part of your body. The blankets trap that warmth and spread it upward. Your own core heat rises to meet it. It is a simple technology, but lying here, wrapped in furs and wool with a warm stone humming at your feet, you understand why simplicity thrives in harsh worlds. Complexity breaks, stones do not. The Ember Keeper returns to their bedding. The hall settles once more. You can feel your muscles softening, loosening into the warmth. You nestle closer to the stone, breathing slowly, letting its ancient, steady heat pull you gently towards sleep. It feels like holding a piece of summer stolen from the earth and tucked under the quilts. And as your eyes close, the last thing you sense is how close comfort and survival sit to each other in this house. All it takes is a stone. All it takes is knowing how to hold warmth until dawn. You drift back towards sleep, but a soft ache in your stomach reminds you of something deeper, something older than bedding or fire. Warmth also comes from inside. The Vikings knew this intuitively, long before anyone talked about calories or metabolism. As you shift beneath the furs, you feel the lingering heaviness of the evening meal settling warmly in your core. That heat is not imagined. It's working on you from the inside out. You inhale slowly, and the air carries a faint scent from earlier cooking. Barley, fat, maybe a whiff of dried fish, simmered in the pot. The stew they shared hours ago was not meant to be subtle. Viking winter meals were built around dense foods that travel easily through the cold months. Salted meats, smoked fish, stored grains, hardy root vegetables, and broth thickened with whatever fats were available. Bodies in harsh winter climates needed fuel not as a luxury, but as a life-saving tool. Eating right before bed turns digestion into a small, slow-burning hearth in your own chest. You remember how the pot earlier had bubbled with a thick mix of grain and meat, steaming into the air as the storm tightened outside. That was not a coincidence. Across the Norse world, hearty stews and porridges were common winter meals. Archaeological evidence from farmsteads shows charred barley grains, cooking pits, and soot-heavy cookware that point toward warm, filling food as a daily anchor. The point wasn't variety. The point was heat. You shift a little, sensing that your belly is still working. Digestion creates warmth, the kind that spreads through your limbs in a slow migration. It's different from the heat of a fire. It's steadier, quieter, more like a private ember carried inside your ribs. You can feel why people here lean into heavy evening meals during winter. It isn't indulgence, it's strategy. The hall around you begins to settle into long, satisfied breathing patterns. It reminds you that food is also community. That pot earlier wasn't cooked for one. It fed everyone in the longhouse. Elders, workers, children, travelers. You picture the ladle passing from hand to hand, the shared wooden bowls, the warmth of broth slipping into hungry mouths. In that moment, the household did more than fill stomachs. It created thermal reserves. The Vikings might not say it that way, but your body feels it. Beside you, someone shifts under their blanket and lets out a low, content sigh. You can guess exactly what that means. Overeating a little in winter is a comfort people have always understood. A bit too much stew, a bit too much bread, a bit more fat than one strictly needs. But it's winter, and winter forgives these things. In icy climates, hunger is dangerous. Fullness is safety. A small movement near the hearth catches your eye. One of the younger people takes a chunk of something from a wooden bowl and chews it slowly, likely dried fish or smoked meat saved from earlier. Late-night snacking isn't modern. It's primal. A little protein before sleep means a warmer night. The Vikings didn't count calories, but their bodies knew. And then there's the mead. You remember watching someone ladle out a honey-scented drink from a skin earlier, handing it around the room. Not enough to make the hall rowdy, just enough to warm bellies and soften the cold's sharp edge. Mead, ale, and fermented drinks were common in winter, partly because water might be unsafe or frozen, and partly because a warm buzz relaxed the mind for sleep. You taste the memory of honey on your tongue even now. It makes your chest glow faintly, like a candle someone forgot to blow out. The child nearest you snores softly, their cheeks flushed from both warmth and food. You smile. Childhood winter memories in these communities must have been built on exactly this. The comfort of going to sleep with a full belly, wrapped in wool, listening to the storm test the walls. Perhaps that's why sagas often begin with feasts, meals, and fires. Warmth and food were the heart of the culture. You feel around with your foot and press it lightly into the warm stone from earlier. The heat rising from your stomach meets the heat from the stone, and something in you unwinds. You think about the Viking understanding of food not purely as sustenance but as energy they could store inside themselves. Long journeys, winter work, and blizzard nights all demanded reserves. Without enough fat or carbohydrates, no number of furs could save you. The interior furnace mattered as much as the hearth. A curious detail catches you when you sit up slightly. Near the bedding, tucked into a wooden bowl, lies a lump of rendered fat wrapped in cloth. Someone must have saved it for early morning or in case anyone wakes cold and hungry. Using fat as a midnight energy boost isn't unique to this culture. It shows up in many northern regions. A bite of fat warms the body faster than grain alone. It's not glamorous, but in winter, practicality doesn't care about glamour. You lie back down, letting the bedding envelope you again, and think briefly of modern diets obsessed with lightness. Here, that would be unthinkable. Thinness in winter can be fatal. A good, solid layer of body insulation, earned from months of eating hearty food, is an asset. Warmth stored under the skin is just as important as warmth stored in the longhouse walls. Researchers today still discuss how seasonal eating patterns shaped Viking metabolism. Some believe winter diets leaned heavily toward fat and protein, while others argue that stored grains played a larger role. The evidence suggests different households adapted based on availability, with coastal settlements relying more on fish and inland farms on meat and dairy. But the universal truth remains. Winter demanded calories, and winter nights demanded them most of all. A faint burp from across the platform makes you chuckle. Even half asleep, someone enjoyed their meal thoroughly. And why shouldn't they? Warmth begins with comfort, and comfort begins with food. Your own belly softens, your breaths lengthen, and you can feel your internal fire burning slow and steady. This warmth is different from the fire's glow, or the animal's breath, or the fur's embrace. It is a personal heat you carry regardless of the storm's temper. The hall seems to sense your growing sleepiness. Sounds fade, breaths deepen. Somewhere, someone mutters a few last words before silence folds over them. You rest your palm on your stomach, feeling the gentle warmth radiating outward into the night. You now understand what the Vikings understood without ever naming it. If you want to sleep through a blizzard, you must stoke the inner fire long before you lie down. Wool warms your skin, furs warm your surface, stones warm your limbs. But it's food-dense, warm, winter food that warms your core. Without that, even the best bedding fails. You sigh, long and slow. Your belly stays warm, your limbs go soft, and gently, sleep comes back, carried on the quiet pulse of your own internal hearth. You wake again to the tiniest shift in the bedding, the kind of movement your brain registers only because everything else is so still. Someone nearby has tugged their cloak tighter, and a loose fold brushes your arm. The contact makes you notice your own clothing again, the layers you never removed, the weight of wool that has become part of your body tonight. In your world, sleep often begins by peeling away layers, slipping into light fabric, maybe even sleeping bare on warm nights. Here, that idea is almost laughable. In a Viking longhouse during a blizzard, you sleep in your clothes because that is how you stay alive. You pull your cloak a little closer, feeling its coarse weave against your cheek. The fibers are scratchy in places, but you notice something more important. The warmth hasn't faded. Even after hours of sleep, the fabric has held the heat of your body, turning into a small, personal shelter. Clothing here is not just attire. It is portable architecture, built to trap air, shed moisture, and turn your body into its own heat source. People around you murmur in their sleep. One person's tunic twists as they roll over, another's hood slips down, revealing braided hair pressed flat from the fabric's weight. You look down at yourself and see how you, too, are layered like a winter landscape. Linen closest to your skin, wool tunic over that, leg wrappings or trousers, socks that feel thick as a felted rug, and above all, the cloak, which acts as your final barrier against cold and drafts. You didn't dress down for bed, you dressed the same as if you were outdoors, except your cloak is looser and pulled around you like a blanket. In cooler seasons across northern Europe, sleeping unclothed simply wasn't common for working households. That isn't guesswork. Textiles found in graves and everyday sites show signs of near-constant wear, and many garments were built for durability rather than occasional use. People slept in them, worked in them, and sometimes died in them. Clothing was expensive to make, demanding hours of spinning, weaving, and sewing. You didn't own much, so the pieces you had were used fully. Nothing was saved for nighttime perfection. The way the cloak falls over your shoulders now reveals its design in the dim light. One edge is pinned with a simple brooch earlier in the evening, though you've since loosened it so you could bundle more freely. The fabric is thick enough that, even now, the draft crawling along the floor barely grazes you. Cloaks were usually made from tightly woven wool, sometimes brushed or fulled to become denser. A well-made cloak can shed water, block wind, and double as a blanket. You can see why many people prized them as much as weapons or tools. You shift again, and the underside of your tunic brushes your skin, reminding you of the linen layer. Linen is smooth compared to wool, and its job is simple: protect you from itching and keep sweat from dampening the outer garments. Linen is easier to wash than wool, dries more quickly, and is more comfortable on the skin. People in the Viking Age understood that even if they never wrote manuals about textile layering. The combination of linen and wool is one of history's most effective cold weather systems, something your modern self might rediscover during camping trips. Beside you, a child wriggles half out of their blanket. Before the cold can reach them, the older woman nearby tucks the child back in, making sure the wool tunic underneath is still covering their legs. You can tell she is used to checking on children at night, watching for exposed skin, because winter punishes carelessness ruthlessly. Small fingers, toes, ears, these are the most vulnerable. Clothing is not optional, not even while asleep. It is life support. You notice something else when you glance across the hall. People remove very little before sleeping. A belt might come off, a knife might be set aside, a hood might be loosened, but the rest stays. The longhouse is a shared environment. You might need to rise quickly if an ember sparks too high, if the animals stir, or if the storm forces an emergency adjustment to the smoke hole. Clothing stays on, because winter does not wait for you to dress. Near the byre partition, someone is rearranging their leg wrappings while still half asleep. Leg wrappings, long strips of wool bound around the calves, are old friends in cold climates. They trap warmth, reduce drafts, and protect the legs from dampness. Sleeping with them on prevents the cold from creeping into the bones of your shins, the place that aches most in winter nights. When the person settles again, the wool rustles and quiets. You become aware of your own breath warming the air trapped between your layers. The heat moves slowly, gliding along your ribs, down your arms, into your legs. You notice you are sweating just a little, not from discomfort, but from the stable warmth your clothing creates. In the Viking world, slight perspiration was normal in winter sleep. The longhouse climate fluctuates depending on the wind, the animals, the fire, and the number of bodies. Your clothing evens out those fluctuations. Across the platform, someone removes a small wool cap and scratches their hair before putting it back on. A nightcap in this era isn't a caricature. It's genuine winter logic. A massive share of body heat escapes through the head and neck. Cover that area, and you preserve heat dramatically. Some sleeping caps were simple tubes of wool. Others were shaped more like modern hoods. Yours is just the hood of your cloak, pulled up loosely, warm enough that your ears no longer feel like fragile icicles. Then your eyes land on a small oddity near a man's sleeping spot, a strip of leather tied loosely around his wrist with a tiny sliver of fur attached. You ask quietly what it is, and someone whispers that some folks believe a fur charm keeps the body awake to warmth and guards against cold nightmares. Whether or not that belief was universal, it fits neatly alongside other bits of household folklore found in northern cultures. People love combining practicality with traces of superstition. If wool keeps the skin warm, perhaps a charm keeps the dreams warm too. You stretch your legs and feel the resistance of wool trousers hugging your knees. The weave is sturdy, thick enough to keep the cold floor from reaching you, even through layers of straw. These trousers, scratched and patched, still do their job impeccably. Viking trousers were sometimes made from wool twill, a durable textile that could take heavy wear. They weren't shaped like modern pants, but their functionality shines in nights like this. You could walk into the storm wearing these and have a fighting chance. You find yourself thinking about how rarely people here experience true nakedness in winter. Clothes are more than warmth, they are boundaries, identity, daily tools. To strip down would feel not relaxing, but exposed and vulnerable. Privacy is nearly non-existent in a longhouse. Clothing becomes a kind of personal room you carry everywhere. Even while sleeping, it helps you protect your dignity and comfort in a communal world. Modern researchers sometimes discuss how much clothing people wore at night in different climates. Much of the evidence suggests layers remained on during sleep, except in short, rare, warm seasons. In extreme northern settlements like Iceland and Greenland, the idea of sleeping lightly clothed during a storm is simply not supported by the environment. No amount of bedding alone is enough. Your clothing is your first and last defense. You exhale slowly, sinking deeper into the layered warmth you've made for yourself. You realize your clothing has warmed to the exact shape of your body. The wool near your chest is softening. The parts near your knees flex gently as you adjust. Your linen shift is dry, absorbing your breath and sweat just enough to keep your wool layers from dampening. Clothing here is alive in its own way, responding to you as much as you respond to it. Someone sighs behind you, the sound soft and satisfied. The storm outside growls again, a deep-throated rumble of wind and snow grinding against the walls. But your layers hold, your warmth holds. You are wrapped in a cocoon of practicality, built from knowledge older than the sagas. You adjust your cloak one last time, tucking it beneath your chin, and marvel at how something so simple, just wool, linen, and leather, can feel like the safest place in the world. You understand now that winter sleep here is not a pause in the day, it is part of the battle. And clothing is your shield, your armor, your winter skin. As your eyes drift shut, you no longer feel like you are wearing garments. You feel like you are wearing warmth itself, shaped to your body, holding you gently until morning. You are drifting in that warm, wool-wrapped state where the mind loosens but the world still hums at the edges when a soft scuff of movement pulls you back. Not everyone in the longhouse is asleep. In fact, you begin to notice patterns you missed earlier. A figure stirs near the hearth. Another shifts closer to the door, as if listening. A faint whisper travels from one end of the hall to the other. You realize then that Viking winter nights were rarely a full house slumber. Someone was always half awake. You tilt your head slightly, careful not to disturb the person pressed against your shoulder. From your half-sitting angle you can just make out a man sitting upright at the end of the platform. His cloak is pulled tight, and the glow from the embers outlines his profile in a dull orange curve. He isn't awake because of insomnia. He's awake because it's his turn. In households across the Viking world, especially during storms, nights were often divided into informal shifts. Not military watches, not rigid patrols, just a shared understanding that someone must stay alert. The dangers weren't only human. Winter brought wolves prowling near farmsteads, snowdrifts blocking doorways, embers that could flare too high, animals that might panic, and roofs that might sag under heavy snow. Sleep was necessary, but uninterrupted sleep for the whole household could be dangerous. So people took turns, even on quiet nights. You watch the man lean forward and nudge the embers with a long stick. He adds nothing new, only adjusts the coals so their heat spreads evenly. It's a simple act but crucial. If the fire dies completely, relighting it in the morning will cost time, tinder, and precious breath in freezing air. But if the fire flares too much, smoke could build dangerously, or sparks could leap into bedding. So the watcher manages the balance, catching tiny problems before they become large ones. A woman rises next. She moves toward the animals in the byre end. Her steps are slow, practiced. She touches each animal gently, checking breath, listening for stress, adjusting straw beneath them. One cow shifts, letting out a low groan, and the woman rubs its flank until it settles again. You understand then that danger on a storm night doesn't always come from outside. A spooked animal could cause chaos in close quarters. Keeping them calm is part of the night's vigilance. You lie back and let your senses stretch. The hall isn't silent. Not entirely. It's a tapestry of subtle noises. A sleeper murmuring, the crack of cooling timbers, a goat's quiet shuffle, the sigh of snow sliding down the roof. These sounds help the watchers. They know what is normal. They know what is not. If anything breaks the pattern, a sudden thump, a gust that feels wrong, a creak heavier than it should be, they wake others immediately. Somewhere near the door, you spot a young man sitting cross-legged, wrapped thickly in his cloak. He's close enough to feel the cold creeping in through the doorway seam. That position is uncomfortable, but it's strategic. From there, he can hear if snow begins to pile dangerously high outside, or if the latch loosens, or if an animal prowls near the entrance. You notice he isn't fully awake, his head dips now and then, but he keeps pulling himself back, listening. You're struck by how communal this vigilance feels. No one orders it, no one complains. It is simply understood that the house must have eyes and ears, even while most sleep. In a modern world with electric heaters and double-pane windows, a storm is an inconvenience. Here, A storm is an active force you must cooperate with. That cooperation happens through half-wakefulness. And yet, it isn't all tension. The watchers sit calmly, sometimes humming under their breath, sometimes whispering softly to one another. You hear a fragment of conversation, two men trading a quiet joke about whose turn is worse, the smouldering hearth or the drafty doorway. Even humor becomes a tool for staying alert. You smile into your blanket. Humans have always fought fear with laughter. You remember earlier hearing someone mention that certain nights felt longer, heavier, more dangerous. Those were the nights when families stretched their vigilance thinner. Some accounts suggest that households occasionally structured their night around two sleeps, waking in the middle for tasks or conversation before drifting into a second rest. Whether that was widespread among Norse people is uncertain, but the idea feels natural here. You're experiencing something similar, a gentle rhythm of waking, watching, adjusting, resting, repeating. One of the older men moves now, his joints cracking in the quiet. He takes the seat by the door, relieving the young watcher. This rotation isn't formal, but it's patterned. Younger, stronger bodies take the colder positions earlier. Older, but more experienced people take the deeper night roles, where judgment matters more than stamina. Everyone understands their part in keeping the household safe. You lift your head again, as the older man listens to the wind. It has a different pitch now, lower, sharper. Snow must be piling on the roof. He stands, walks to the center beam, and presses his palm against it, testing. The beam feels firm. No sign of sinking or strain. You hadn't realized until this moment that roof checking is part of the night watch as well. Snow load can be deadly if ignored. One crack, one sag, and the whole interior could change. But the man nods to himself, satisfied. The hall is holding strong. A colder draft snakes across your feet. You pull your cloak tighter and glance around. The watchers feel it too. One of them rises, lifts a fur from the wall, and drapes it more tightly across the doorway. The draft calms. That small intervention saves everyone later cold. And then, something softer catches your attention. A quiet tapping near the far wall. A woman sitting upright is running her fingers over a carved wooden charm. Not a protective amulet exactly, but something closer to a meditation piece. She taps it rhythmically, staying awake through touch. Little nighttime wake tricks like this appear in many oral traditions, ways to keep one's mind alert when darkness and sleepiness feel overpowering. She continues, gently tapping, watching the door and the animals without strain. Researchers still puzzle over how structured night watching was in early northern households. Some believe entire families stayed lightly awake, never sinking into full sleep. Others argue for more organized watch patterns, especially on large farmsteads. The truth is probably a shifting blend. Weather, season, age, and personality all shape the rhythm. Tonight, you can feel that truth in the air. There is no strict schedule, only a shared responsibility, passed from one pair of hands to another like a warm stone. You notice how comforting this system becomes as your own eyelids droop again. You relax precisely because someone else is awake. It is trust, unspoken but absolute. You aren't sleeping alone in a silent house. You're sleeping inside a living network, where rest and wakefulness flow back and forth like breathing. One last glance toward the doorway, watcher shows him adjusting his cloak, pulling it tighter around his shoulders. He looks tired but steady. He leans back and listens, always listening, while the rest of you slip deeper into warmth. You lower your head again, letting your body soften into the bedding. The storm can rage, the wind can claw, but someone will always be awake. Someone will always hear the danger before you do. It is the most ancient comfort in the world. You sleep because someone else keeps watch. You sink back into the warmth, letting sleep pull at you again, but another sensation begins to reach you, pressure, faint but unmistakable, as someone shifts closer, tucking their knees behind your back. It's not intrusive. It's simply how space works here. The sleeping platform is full, and bodies adjust instinctively. You lift your head just enough to glance along the row. What you see is not chaos, or disorder, or discomfort. It is a map made of people. In the dim glow from the embers, you can make out the layout. Children near the center of the bench, flanked by their parents or older siblings. Elders rest closer to the wall, supported by its steady warmth and protected from the edge drafts. Guests like you are placed where warmth can reach you easily, but where you won't accidentally roll into the fire pit if you dream too wildly. Every position has meaning. Every body, whether tiny or weathered, has a place carved by care, custom, and necessity. You let your eyes adjust to the shapes. A toddler lies curled between two adults, a tiny bundle drowning in wool, their hair sticking out in disheveled tufts. The couple on either side have arranged their cloaks to overlap, creating a tunnel of warmth that funnels straight toward the child. In a moment of clarity, you realize this is how families kept their littlest ones alive through impossible winters, not by building separate cribs or special rooms, but by making their own bodies the insulation. A bit further down the platform, two elders share a blanket, their shoulders touching. One of them snores softly, but the other stays half awake, adjusting bedding with practiced instinct. Old bones chill quickly, so the warmest part of the wall supports them. Their hands rest on the platform in almost identical positions, palms splayed wide, as though memorizing the wood grain. You understand then that age has its own place in the geography of sleep, honored, protected, and gently surrounded. The person pressed against your back shifts again, bringing their blanket with them. Their warmth spreads across your ribs, steady and comforting. You feel your own body responding in ways older than language, relaxing, easing, trusting. Humans were meant to sleep near one another. The modern habit of isolating each sleeper in neat private rooms is a very new idea. Here, in this hall, sleep is a social act, a community rhythm. You catch a tiny sound, a child whispering. Not loudly, not enough to wake anyone, but a soft, sleepy mumble aimed at the woman beside them. The woman responds with a faint hum, almost a lullaby. A single note stretched gently through the warm air. That sound drifts along the row, soothing even those who aren't awake enough to hear it fully. You close your eyes again, but your hearing stays open. You begin to recognize the pattern formed by all these bodies. It is both emotional and practical. Children sleep between adults, not at the edge, because heat loss would be too dangerous. Elders are sheltered from foot traffic and draft. Young adults, strongest in the cold, take the outer positions closer to the air movement. Guests are placed where they can feel included and watched over. The longhouse platform becomes a portrait of the household's relationships. And there are exceptions, little personalized quirks. Someone has chosen to sleep slightly elevated on an extra folded cloak, perhaps because they snore less that way. A child has migrated across two blankets during sleep, and rather than push them back, the adults shifted themselves instead. Warmth of body trumps the symmetry of neat lines. Small adjustments ripple back and forth like tidewater on a shallow shore. As your eyes flicker half open, you notice something near the far end, a dog curled into a tight ball against the platform's base. Not in the bedding, but close enough to share warmth and catch crumbs of comfort. Dogs appear in both archaeology and sagas as winter companions, not always inside the longhouse, but often near it. Seeing one inside tonight makes perfect sense. On blizzard nights, all warm bodies belong together. A whisper of fabric catches your ear. Someone rises to switch places with another sleeper. Maybe an elder needed warmth closer to the center. Maybe a child kicked their blanket off 3 times already. Maybe 2 siblings decided to trade corners. Whatever the reason, the rearranging happens quietly, seamlessly. No complaints. The geography of sleep is flexible when warmth is the goal. For a moment you wonder whether this practice of sleeping in such close formation created conflicting emotions. Comfort, yes, but also friction. Did people ever crave space, privacy, silence? Likely yes, but the environment allowed no indulgence. Winter forced cooperation. Survival wasn't an individual act. It was a group project that played out night after night on these shared benches. There are still disagreements among researchers about how strictly these sleeping positions were enforced by custom. Some believe family clusters remained stable night after night, forming consistent pods across the platform. Others argue that winter storms disrupted patterns and forced adaptable arrangements, with warmth outranking tradition. Evidence varies from site to site, and the sagas, when they mention sleeping at all, tend to dramatize instead of describe daily life. But here, lying among these shifting bodies, you can feel the truth. Warmth dictates its own rules. The person behind you breathes out, their breath brushing the nape of your neck. It is warm, steady, grounding. You realize that in this hall, you're not just protected from the storm, you're folded into a network of human warmth, each sleeper reinforcing the next, shoulder against shoulder, cloak against cloak, breath mingling in the dim air. A soft creak of the platform moves through the wood, sending a gentle vibration up your arm. Someone adjusts a child's blanket. Someone settles their tired legs. Someone hums faintly in their dreams. And you feel yourself slipping into a deeper, quieter comfort than you've known in a long time. You draw your cloak closer. The storm can howl all it wants. In here, the geography of sleep shields you completely. Wrapped in this shared warmth, children, elders, animals, strangers, you drift once more into the long night. The cold can wait until morning. You don't know how long you've slept when the dream changes. One moment you're nestled between warm bodies in the longhouse, and the next your mind drifts outward, imagining what this night would feel like if you weren't under a roof at all. The storm's muffled growl outside reminds you that Vikings didn't always sleep in longhouses. Sometimes they were far from home when winter clenched its fists. Traders on frozen routes, hunters chasing game, messengers carrying news between farms, many of them faced nights where the only shelter was whatever they had the skill and courage to build. You pull your cloak tighter as the image forms more clearly. You are out on a snowy trail, far from any settlement. The wind is sharp enough to scratch at your ears. Your breath turns to frost in an instant. You imagine trudging through knee-deep drifts with only a horse, a pack, and your instincts, hunting for a place where the snow and wind can't kill you before dawn. The Vikings carried travel tents, especially those who journeyed regularly. These weren't luxurious canvas structures. They were made from layers of wool or hide stretched across wooden poles, often sharing the same design principles as ship tents used during summer voyages. Archaeological interpretations of tent stakes and pole fittings, combined with saga references, make it clear that portable shelters existed. But shelter is a generous word. These tents kept wind off your face and snow off your body, but they didn't offer the solid warmth of a longhouse wall. You picture yourself setting up one of these travel tents in a blizzard. The wind tears at the cloth. Snow blinds your eyes. Your fingers ache as you drive stakes into frozen earth. You'd choose low terrain behind a ridge, under a rock shelf, in the partial shelter of birch trees to keep the wind's full force away. You'd weigh down the edges of the tent with stones or snow itself, sealing it against drafts. Only when the structure stopped flapping violently would you risk crawling inside. Inside that cramped space, you'd light no fire. A fire would be suicidal. Flames consume oxygen, and tents trap smoke. Instead, you'd rely on the heat from your own breath, the insulation of your cloak, and the warmth of whatever furs you carried. You'd huddle with your gear, maybe even sleep with your boots tucked under your cloak so they wouldn't freeze into unwearable boards by morning. Every traveler knew that boots left out overnight could ruin an entire journey. But sometimes the snow fell too quickly, or the wind was too savage, and tents became useless. In those moments, the traveler turned to the oldest trick of cold country survival, digging into the snow itself. Snow pits appear in accounts of Arctic peoples, and it's reasonable to believe similar tactics were known across ancient northern cultures, including Viking-age Scandinavia. Snow, counterintuitively, can be a powerful insulator once you are inside it. Digging a shallow trench, lining it with branches or animal skins, and curling into it with a cloak pulled overhead, traps your body heat more efficiently than you'd think. You imagine lying in such a pit, a small hollow carved into a world of white, your breath warming the tiny pocket of air around your face. Above you, the storm screams, hurling snow sideways. The ground beneath you is mercilessly cold, so you'd use anything extra clothing, evergreen branches, straw if traveling from a farm to lift your body away from the freezing earth. If you had a companion, human or animal, you'd share the pit, pressing your bodies together to create a fragile, temporary warmth. A stray memory returns to you, something you heard earlier in the longhouse about travelers heating small stones or metal pieces and wrapping them in cloth to slip into their cloaks. It wasn't always possible, especially far from hearths, but if you'd had the chance to pocket a warm stone at dusk, you could carry that warmth into the snow pit. For an hour or two, it could mean the difference between shivering awake or drifting into dangerous cold sleep. Modern minds might picture Viking travelers grimly enduring these nights, but you can also feel the quiet skill behind every movement. Experience taught them how to survive, which valleys sheltered the least wind, which trees broke the cold, how to angle the cloak so snow fell off instead of settling, how to breathe through wool to warm the air before it entered the lungs. These techniques don't fit easily into written sagas, but the land itself teaches them, and the people carried this knowledge like a second language. Some researchers still disagree on how standardized Viking travel shelters were. Tent remains are fragmentary. The sagas romanticize travel but rarely describe the sleeping arrangements in detail. Some argue that most travelers relied on natural formations and pure toughness rather than formal gear. Others point to trade routes and long expeditions that almost certainly required well-designed portable shelters. Your imagined snow pit could be seen as improvisation or as tradition. It depends on the region, season, and the traveler's experience. You let that imagined cold seep into your thoughts for a moment, just long enough to appreciate where you actually are, surrounded by warm bodies, protected by strong walls, wrapped in wool and fur. The contrast deepens your gratitude. A night in the open would leave your hair rimed with frost, your beard stiff, your fingers numb. Here, your breath is warm enough to fog the air softly. You stretch your toes beneath the blankets, feeling the lingering heat of the warmed stone you had earlier. You can hardly imagine being out there without such comforts. To sleep while traveling in winter was an act of discipline and courage. You picture the traveler waking at intervals, brushing snow off their face to avoid suffocation, adjusting their cloak to keep the cold from crawling inside. Rest would come in short, shallow bursts, not the deep, slow breathing of a longhouse bench. And yet, people survived it. They crossed mountain passes, they braved frozen seas, they delivered messages, hunted in deep snow, and returned with stories that later became poems. That toughness wasn't theatrical, it was simply necessary. You exhale, slow and warm, sinking once more into your bedding. The imagined tent fades, the snow pit dissolves, the cruel wind retreats to the edges of your awareness. You are back inside stone-thick silence and shared human warmth. As you close your eyes again, the thought settles softly into you. Only those who truly understand the cold can truly understand comfort. Tonight, you understand both. You slip into another layer of sleep, but this time, your thoughts drift toward the coast, toward the smell of salt and wet timber, toward a kind of shelter that feels nothing like the longhouse, yet belongs fully to the Viking world. As the storm hums outside, your mind pulls you to a shoreline where winter waves slap against dark pebbles and a ship sits hauled up on land, its hull tilted slightly like a sleeping animal. You've heard the stories. When winter caught travelers far from home, a ship itself could become a bed. You imagine walking toward that vessel in the fading twilight. The sky is a hard, iron grey. The wind is sharp enough to split your lips. Snow dusts the beach, swirling around the keel. The ship, long, narrow, and built from overlapping planks, rests above the tide line. It isn't meant to be a house, but in winter, necessity bends everything. You picture sailors approaching it with numb hands, tired legs, and the quiet dread of another night outside. Longships are marvels of engineering. Clinker-built hulls, flexible ribs, tarred seams, and curves that cut through waves like a knife through cloth. Archaeological finds like the Oseberg and Gokstad ships show just how carefully crafted these vessels were. But their usefulness didn't end when the crew stopped rowing. A ship hauled onto land and turned slightly on its side could form a sturdy, wind-breaking shell. That shell could become a shelter crude, cold, and imperfect, yet still infinitely better than being exposed to the storm. You imagine standing beside such a ship. The hull looms above you, its planks dark with salt, its nails catching the last scraps of light. You slip beneath its side, into the shallow cave created by its tilt. It smells of tar, old rope, wet wool, and the faint metallic tang of seawater. The air is colder here than in a longhouse, but the wind is weaker. The hull blocks the worst of it. Snow drifts lightly but doesn't bite as fiercely. The crew would lay furs and cloaks on the ground, maybe piling seaweed or dry grasses beneath to insulate from the frozen earth. They'd huddle together, using the ship's ribs as a framework to hang more cloaks or sailcloth. Sailcloth especially was a gift in winter. It was heavy, oiled, and tough, able to block wind if tied securely. Spread properly, it could turn the open underside of a ship into a small, makeshift hut. You can almost hear the process unfolding, the creak of the hull as the wind pushes against it, the grunt of someone tying down the sail, the low mutters exchanged between exhausted sailors. A man might drag a small anchor stone beneath the keel to weigh down the cloth. Another might tuck a fur across a gap where snow threatens to swirl in. The work would be clumsy with frozen fingers, but the stakes would force precision. Inside that cramped shelter, the warmth would come from bodies alone. Fires were far too dangerous near tarred wood. Instead, you'd rely on cloaks, furs, and layers of wool. A heavy sea cloak, often woven thicker than inland cloaks, would be essential. These cloaks appear in sagas as prized possessions, sometimes waterproofed with oils or animal fats. Wrapped tightly, they trap heat even in the damp, salty air. You imagine one draped over your shoulders now, its weight grounding you like an anchor. You lie down beneath the imaginary ship's curve and feel the rigid cold of the ground. Straw is scarce on coasts, so sailors would improvise with whatever was around. Seaweed, driftwood, even their own shields, laid flat beneath the body. It's easy to forget that a wooden shield isn't just a weapon, it's also a portable board. Place one beneath your hip or shoulder, and it breaks the contact with the freezing earth. The sagas don't spell this out, but the logic is undeniable. You can see someone sliding a round shield under their side, using it to stop heat loss. Then you hear a small, embarrassed cough in your imagined camp. Someone has shifted too close to the hull and pressed against it. The wood is icy, sucking warmth instantly. Everyone chuckles softly, a quiet reminder to keep furs between skin and ship. That laughter feels necessary. Humor is one of the few sources of warmth that doesn't require fuel. As you lie there in your mind, you can almost feel the rhythm of the sea beneath the cold. Even when frozen or storming, the ocean has a pulse. It makes the hull groan softly in the wind, a sound that could be eerie or comforting depending on the listener. Tonight, in your imagination, it's comforting. The ship is doing what it always does, keeping people alive, whether by cutting through waves or by shielding them on land. Not all scholars agree on how common this practice was. Some believe overnighting under ships was reserved for emergencies or travel mishaps. Others argue it was a regular part of seasonal journeys, especially when moving livestock or goods between coastal settlements. Evidence from boat burials, tent finds, and the practical realities of winter travel hint that both might be true. The habit likely varied by region and crew. But anyone who has stood on a Viking coast knows how fierce winter can be. A ship is too valuable to abandon, too sturdy to ignore, and too present not to use. You picture sailors sharing body heat beneath sailcloth, their breath forming tiny clouds, their cloaks overlapping in a patchwork shield. They'd talk quietly about weather, family, gods, debts, or nothing at all. Words keep cold from swallowing silence. Maybe one man hums a familiar tune, maybe another whispers a simple prayer. These moments, hidden from history, shape the survival of countless winter journeys. At some point during the night, someone would check the lines securing the sailcloth. Another would brush accumulating snow away from breathing gaps. Sleep would come in short waves, not the deep, restful kind found in a longhouse, but still enough to let muscles recover. Even there, half asleep beneath a cold hull, people found pockets of comfort. Warm legs tucked together, a shared fur, a hand resting near the hilt of a knife, just in case. You stretch under your blankets in the longhouse now, feeling the luxury of solid walls and a smoke hole instead of a hull. Your imagined shelter slowly dissolves, replaced by the warm presence of the bodies surrounding you. But the image lingers. The cold coast, the tilted ship, the determined intimacy of sailors, sharing breath on a storm-ridden night. As the longhouse creaks gently in the wind, you think, sleeping under a ship would be harder than this, harsher, lonelier. Yet Vikings did it when they had to. They curled into wool and furs, trusted their vessels, and greeted the dawn with salt in their hair and frost on their cloaks. You turn on your side, grateful for the roof above you and the warm platform beneath. You breathe out slowly, letting the imaginary cold fade. Tonight, you have walls. Tonight, you have a hearth. Tonight, you don't need a ship for shelter. And with that thought, you drift back toward the deep, steady warmth of the longhouse's embrace. You sink further into the furs, drifting in and out, when a sudden wave of remembered heat rolls through your thoughts so vivid that for a heartbeat, you almost feel sweat on your skin. It's not coming from the longhouse. It's coming from something older in your mind. Something you heard earlier in the evening when the household murmured about winter rituals. Not every Viking night began cold. Some began with fire, not in the living hall, but in a separate space built precisely to heat the body until it glowed. You let your imagination carry you back to that moment, to the warm house or sweat house many northern communities used before sleep. Not a luxury spa, not a modern sauna, something earthier, rougher, but deeply familiar. You picture a small building dug halfway into the ground, its walls of stone or turf, its low ceiling trapping heat like a clenched fist. A pile of stones lies in the center, heated earlier, until they glowed red. Steam hisses where water drips onto the rocks. The air is thick, warm, and alive. Sweat bathing traditions in Northern Europe stretch back centuries, and while not every Viking settlement used them the same way, there is solid archaeological and ethnographic evidence of steam houses, earth saunas, and heated rooms connected to farm life. These structures often sat apart from the main hall, both for practicality and for fire safety. People used them to bathe, sweat out sickness, ease aching muscles, and on nights like this, to store heat inside their bodies before returning to the longhouse. You imagine stepping inside that shadowy, glowing room. The heat hits you instantly, washing over your frozen limbs. You sit on a wooden bench, slick with steam, your cloak and tunic discarded nearby. Your skin prickles as warmth sinks into your muscles. The air smells of wet stone, damp earth, and maybe herbs thrown onto the hot rocks, a handful of juniper, mugwort, or pine needles curling into fragrant vapor. The older woman leading the session gestures for you to sit closer to the stones. She knows the rhythm. Heat, rest, breathe, sweat, cool air for a moment at the doorway, then heat again. A cycle meant not for comfort alone, but for survival. If you fill your body with warmth before returning to the storm, you create a kind of thermal reservoir that helps you sleep more deeply and wake less often through the night. Others sit with you in the glow. A farmer with stiff shoulders, a hunter rubbing his knees, a girl giggling as steam curls her braids into wild shapes. This is not a silent ritual. People talk, laugh, share gossip, complain about the cold, or sit quietly as the heat works its slow magic. Sweat beads on your arms. Your heartbeat slows. Your breath deepens. Clothing here would only trap moisture and chill you later, so you let your skin be bare, knowing that afterward you will wrap yourself again in layers of wool. You lean forward as someone splashes a dipper of water onto the stones. The burst of steam rises like a ghost, wrapping your face in sudden heat that makes your eyes sting pleasantly. You feel your pores open, releasing the cold stored in your bones. The air is so thick with warmth that it seems to vibrate. After a long while, you step outside into the night air. The contrast is breathtaking, your skin tingles, the cold biting but not harmful, as if your body now carries its own inner sun. You breathe deeply, letting the shock anchor the warmth deeper. Then you dress again, carefully, slowly, layering the wool against newly heated skin. The clothing feels almost alive, catching the warmth and holding it. Some people linger to cool off fully before heading back to the longhouse. Others rush inside to trap their heat quickly. Either way, returning to the communal hall after such a sweat feels like glowing from within. Even the draft at the doorway cannot steal that stored warmth immediately. You carry it with you, like a secret. You can almost feel it now, lying on the platform, the phantom memory of heat pooling in your chest, your arms, your legs. Perhaps the household didn't sweat bathe tonight, or maybe they did earlier before you arrived. Either way, the idea lingers. Body heat is a resource, a bankable treasure, and people learn to save it where they could. There's a quiet little detail you remember hearing earlier. Some farmers, after leaving the sauna or sweat house, would rub their skin with a bit of animal fat or oil before dressing again. It sealed moisture, softened the itch of wool, and added another layer of insulation. It wasn't common everywhere, but it's a small, earthy touch that fits the logic of winter life. You imagine someone gently smoothing fat into their arms, creating a subtle barrier against the night's claws. Not all scholars fully agree on the frequency of Viking sweathouse use or the exact design of these structures. Some excavations reveal clear steam rooms, others suggest more multi-purpose warm spaces. There's even debate about whether certain pits found near longhouses were for sweating, smoking food, or something else. But the presence of heated stone bathing traditions across the region, combined with later Scandinavian saunas, makes it more than plausible that winter nights were sometimes preceded by deliberate warming rituals. You stretch slightly beneath your blankets now, letting your body relax. You can almost feel that heat deep in your muscles, still the imagined echo of a stone-warmed bench beneath your thighs, the steam wrapping your face, the shock of cold air afterward, and the embrace of wool as you stepped back inside. Whether or not tonight truly included such a ritual, your mind uses it now, a gentle warmth drifting through your limbs. The storm outside presses against the roof, but inside, your body feels like a hearth in its own right, warmed by fire, tempered by cold, layered in wool, bordered by furs, and protected by the longhouse walls, a perfect circle of winter survival. The heat memory settles into you, drowsy and soothing. You breathe it in, You let it cradle your thoughts, and slowly, very slowly, you allow sleep to rise again, as warm and soft as steam settling back into stillness. You drift in the warm hush of the longhouse, floating between sleep and waking, when a soft murmur reaches your ears. Not conversation exactly, more like a strand of sound woven gently through the darkness. Someone near the center of the hall is speaking in a slow, melodic cadence. Instinctively, you lift your head just a little, feeling the shift of blankets and the presence of bodies pressed close. The voice continues, steady as a heartbeat, and you realize what it is: a bedtime story. In a world where storms can erase landmarks and night can last longer than your comfort, stories aren't luxuries. They're lifelines. They gather minds, the same way furs gather warmth. You blink into the dimness and see the storyteller, a middle-aged woman with long, thick hair braided in loops that catch the ember glow. She sits with her knees drawn up, her cloak wrapped loosely around her shoulders, her hands tracing slow patterns on the wood as she speaks. Her voice is calm, rising and falling like gentle waves. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. The hall is quiet except for the soft breaths of sleeping bodies and the occasional shifting of straw. Children near her burrow, closer to their parents. Adults let their minds drift. Even the animals seem to settle more still, as if the story itself is part of the night's rhythm. Across the Viking world, stories, songs, charms, and whispered verses shaped the emotional life of winter. People carried sagas in their hearts, recited genealogies from memory, chanted protective lines, and used spoken words the same way they used wool and fire to survive the cold. The sagas recorded later may feel grand and violent, but nightly stories were often gentler tales of ancestors, small myths, farm legends, mischief spirits, or simply memories from the warmer months. You listen as the woman's words paint the image of a wanderer walking into a mountain mist, guided by a small carved amulet, said to glow only when he faced true north. The children listening aren't thinking about the logic of it. They're feeling the softness of her tone, the rhythm, the comfort of something familiar when the storm presses so hard against the longhouse walls that you can hear snow sliding down the roof. The story shifts, flowing like smoke. Now she speaks of the sea, the dark winter sea that calls to some and warns others away. She speaks of dreams where ancestors whisper guidance, of small wooden runes left on the bed to guard against restless spirits. Runes as protective charms appear in a handful of archaeological finds and later folk traditions, though their exact use varies. Whether carved for magic, memory, or habit, their presence in sleep-related rituals feels grounded, almost obvious. Humans have always wanted reassurance as they close their eyes at the edge of danger. Near the storyteller, you spot a tiny wooden object, tucked under a blanket, a rune carved roughly into its surface. Its edges are worn smooth from handling. Maybe it's just a keepsake. Maybe someone believes it keeps bad dreams out. Maybe it's a child's treasure. These tiny pieces of wood become the quiet guardians of winter nights, holding bundles of meaning without needing grand explanations. A girl whispers a question, and the storyteller pauses. Her silence is soft, thoughtful. When she speaks again, her voice is even gentler. She talks about traveling dreams, night journeys where the mind wanders while the body rests. Some of these dream journeys appear in northern folklore and sagas, described with reverence or fear depending on the culture. Tonight, in this longhouse, dreams are spoken of as something delicate and precious, like feathers drifting through the embers' glow. You lie back again, letting the voice wash over you. There's something deeply soothing in the way stories move through winter spaces. You begin to understand that narration itself is another source of warmth, a mental fire held in the center of the hall. The Vikings didn't have books to lull them to sleep, no written pages to follow by candlelight. What they had were voices, breath, memory, imagination. They passed stories from one generation to the next, the same way they passed wool cloaks and carved spoons. The woman's tale now turns towards something smaller, quieter, a household good luck charm, a ring hidden under a pillow, a knot tied in wool to protect a sleeper. These kinds of charms appear across many northern traditions, though scholars interpret their exact origins differently. They hover between superstition and comfort, and in truth, the line hardly matters. In the hush of a winter night, a charm under a pillow is not about magic, it's about reassurance. Beyond the storyteller, a man lying against the wall hums a soft tune under his breath, a steady drone that blends with the tale like background music. You get the sense that he's done this many nights before, adding a calm undercurrent to the spoken story. His voice is low, steady, vibrating through the wood of the wall and into your ribs. Someone further down the platform touches the hilt of a small knife, beside them a gesture of habit, not fear. It seems almost symbolic, the way someone today might sleep near a comforting object. You think of how personal items, charms, knives, carved animals often slept with their owners, tucked near the bedding, not because threats lurked constantly inside the hall, but because winter heightens the sense that one wants familiar things nearby. Then a particularly deep gust shakes the longhouse roof, and snow thumps down onto the thatch. A few children flinch. One whimpers. Without missing a beat, the storyteller shifts her tale's tone, weaving in a gentle explanation of winter spirits shaking out their cloaks. The children relax. Even you find your breath lengthening. This, you realize, is the quiet genius of winter storytelling. It turns frightening noises into understandable companions. Some researchers have tried to parse the exact function of these bedtime tales in Viking Age households, whether they were truly narratives, protective charms, or a blend. Evidence is limited, since so much of daily life wasn't written down, but linguistic hints, saga references, and later folk customs suggest that soothing bedtime speech was as common then as now. The form may change, but the impulse is eternal. The woman's story is winding down now, her words stretching out like warm steam. Her cadence slows. The humming man fades out. Children sigh into their blankets. Adults shift into more comfortable positions, and you feel sleep pulling gently at you again. You close your eyes, letting her final words settle over you like another layer of bedding. The tale becomes part of the longhouse's breathing, part of the warmth threading through bodies, part of the soft glow holding back the storm. This is how people kept their minds warm during blizzard nights, with words, with dreams, with the gentle weaving of imagination into the dark. You drift deeper, carried by the soft echo of the storyteller's voice, when a new awareness begins to seep into you, not warmth, not sound, but a kind of instinctive alertness. Even in the safety of the longhouse, people live by paying attention to the world outside, and in Viking lands, nothing shapes the rhythm of survival more than the weather. You begin noticing something subtle. Even half asleep, the household knows the storm's language. You open your eyes a sliver. A man near the doorway is awake again, not standing, not tense, just listening with the kind of stillness that comes from a lifetime of reading the wind. His posture is relaxed but alert, like a dog that hears vibrations long before humans do. You can feel the entire hall holding a quiet thread of awareness, even as most people sleep. It's as though the weather has a mythology of its own, and everyone here speaks it fluently. The Vikings didn't have barometers or satellite maps. What they had were sky signs, cloud shapes, animal behavior, wind patterns, the smell of the air, even the taste of snow on the tongue. Many of these skills show up in later Scandinavian lore and likely reach back much further. The weather wasn't a background element. It was a teacher, an enemy, a companion. To live through winter, you had to treat it like an unpredictable god. You remember something you heard earlier, a fisherman explaining how snow that falls too softly means nothing good. Soft snow hides sharp storms, he said. Listen for the low hiss instead of the scrape. You hadn't understood it then, but now, listening to the faint texture of snowfall outside, you think you know what he meant. The snow tonight has a thickness to its sound, a muffled heaviness that suggests more is coming. You shift slightly, feeling straw whisper beneath you. The people closest to the doorway aren't sleeping deeply. They tilt their heads every now and then, hearing something in the storm's voice. Is it rising? Is it easing? Is it changing direction? These questions are as important as food stores or wool layers. Across the hall, an older woman turns in her sleep, murmuring something about north wind teeth. You don't know exactly what the phrase means, but it tells you something. Weather wisdom is woven into language. Families pass it down the way they pass down recipes and lullabies. Every gust carries meaning. Every quiet moment does too. You let your breathing settle, and your mind turns toward the sky outside. If you had stepped out earlier, before the storm sealed the world in white, you might have noticed the signs too. A sky that turns pale and flat, clouds stacking like layers of wool, ravens flying unusually low. Even the smell changes a metallic hint that precedes the hardest snowfalls. In sagas and folk memory, these signs aren't mystical. They're practical knowledge shaped by centuries of watching the horizon. Some traditions say that when dogs grow restless or sheep huddle too tightly, bad weather is coming. Others claim that if the sea grows strangely quiet before dusk, a blizzard will follow. Whether or not these cues worked every time is impossible to measure now, but they provided a framework for reading the world. In your half-sleep, you can imagine a young shepherd learning these signs from an elder, absorbing them not as superstition, but as survival tools. And then there are sky colors. You remember hearing earlier about a blood sunrise or a milk blue dusk. These aren't poetic flourishes, they're diagnostic codes. A pale, cold blue at sunset can mean dry cold. A yellow tint across the horizon means drifting snow later in the night. Deep purple clouds signal heavy snowfall. Vikings didn't need temperature scales. The sky told them everything. You shift slightly, tugging your blanket closer, and your thoughts drift to another kind of weather reading. Sound. In the dark north, storms speak. The squeal of wind on wood, the whistle through shutters, the heavy thud of snow sliding from the roof. Each sound gives clues. When snow falls in thick, wet clumps, it creates a heavy whump that means the temperature is rising. When it makes a fine tapping sound, the cold is sharpening. When the wind whistles in pulses, it means the storm's center is shifting. Tonight, the storm's song is steady, persistent, not weakening yet. The watchers know this. You sense their shared patience. No one moves to adjust the roof vent. No one fusses with the doorway. They are waiting for the moment the storm gives its next clue. A small quirky detail catches your attention. Someone near the fire pit earlier had scattered a handful of crushed ice on the floor, watching how quickly it melted. It wasn't for cleaning or play. It was a simple weather test. If the ice melted slowly, the night would stay dangerously cold. If it melted quickly, warmth was coming, or worse, sleet. It's not a scientific instrument by modern standards, but it's clever, born from the kind of household experimentation winter encourages. A few minutes later, a faint draft creeps under the door, colder than before, but this time, it carries a slight shift, something subtle in the pressure. The watcher by the door lifts his head. He leans forward, listening. You can almost feel him sorting through the storm's vocabulary. Strength, direction, density, rhythm. He whispers something to the older man near the hearth. The man grunts softly. Backwind, he murmurs. It'll turn soon. That phrase, too, feels like a family inheritance, a mix of observation and intuition passed down through generations. Whether he is right or wrong matters less than the fact that he knows how to think about the storm. Scholars still puzzle over how much formal weather knowledge Vikings possessed versus how much was practical, lived wisdom. Some argue they had a sophisticated understanding of regional patterns, especially sailors who read winds like scripture. Others think much of their weather lore was intuitive rather than systematic. But lying here, surrounded by people who react to every subtle shift, you understand how unnecessary formal categories would have been. When your life depends on the sky, you learn its habits intimately. And then quietly, softly you hear it. The wind dips. Just a moment, just a breath. But the watchers sense it instantly. Someone sits a little straighter. Someone relaxes slightly. The storm hasn't ended, but it has changed its key. The longhouse seems to sigh along with them. You lower your head again, letting your mind settle into the same ancient instinct. You don't need forecasts or charts. Not tonight. All you need is the safety of walls, the warmth of bodies, and ears tuned to the sky. You breathe out, slow and deep, trusting that the household knows exactly how the night is unfolding. Outside, the wind is speaking. Inside, the people are listening. You've begun slipping again toward sleep, that soft edge where warmth and darkness merge, when a faint scent pulls you back, something earthy, sweet, and unexpected. Not smoke, not straw, not wool. Something sharper, greener, drifting from somewhere near the center of the platform. You inhale again, and the fragrance intensifies. It's herbs, not the kind used for cooking, but something meant to soothe. You open your eyes enough to see a small bundle resting near a woman's head, a satchel made of loosely woven cloth, tied with a bit of twine. When she shifts, a whisper of scent rises, meadowsweet, or perhaps dried heather. You remember hearing earlier that certain plants were sometimes placed near bedding in winter, not because they magically warmed the body, but because they softened the mind. In a season where nights were long and storms relentless, any small comfort that made the darkness gentler was welcomed. You lift your head slightly. Now you notice more details scattered across the sleeping platform. Small aromatic bundles tucked into corners, sprigs of dried pine near the wall, even a little clay cup filled with something crumbly. These aren't decorations, they're quiet luxuries, comforts that linger at the edge of practicality. Northern households often used local herbs for many reasons: medicine, brewing, ritual, or simply scenting enclosed spaces. While the sagas rarely focus on such domestic subtleties, later Scandinavian folk practices preserve the hints. Juniper burned to purify stale air, dried birch leaves rubbed through the hands for their fresh scent, sweet gale slipped into bedding to keep nightmares or pests away. The Vikings lived close to the land. Even their comforts smelled of forests, fields, and bogs. You settle back into your bedding and realize you can identify at least 3 scents: juniper, heather, and something sharper, perhaps angelica root. It's not overpowering. It's barely noticeable until you focus. But combined with the smoky warmth of the hall, it makes the air feel thicker, more alive, like winter has been softened at the edges. Someone near you rustles through a small pouch and pulls out what looks like a little wooden box. When she opens it, the air fills with a sharper fragrance, some kind of oil. She dabs a bit onto her wrists and neck, rubbing it gently. You catch the faint aroma of pine resin mixed with animal fat. It's not perfume in the modern sense. It's a homemade skin balm, both protective and comforting. Winter air cracks skin relentlessly. A smear of resin and fat balm keeps skin from splitting, helps it stay warm, and offers a tiny sensory pleasure. You can imagine her mother teaching her the mixture, and her grandmother teaching her mother before that. Then you notice an older man rubbing something into his joints. The smell reaches you slowly. Birch tar, sharp and smoky. Birch tar was used for so many things: adhesives, waterproofing, even simple skin salves. It could also ease aches when massaged into tired limbs. Watching him now, it strikes you how every small object in the longhouse seems to straddle practicality and comfort. Nothing exists for luxury alone, yet comfort sneaks in anyway. In the dimness, you spot something stranger: a tiny woven charm hanging from a roof beam, swaying slightly with each shift of the wind. It's braided from plant fibers and bits of colored thread. When you ask quietly, someone near you murmurs that charms like that are meant to calm the hall, to keep the night smooth. Whether or not every Viking believed such things, there's no denying that households often kept small symbolic objects hedge against fear, habit, handed down, or simply something to do with restless hands on long winter nights. Further along the platform, a man is chewing something thoughtfully. Not food, a piece of dried root. The fragrance drifts faintly toward you, licorice-like. Perhaps angelica or fennel root, both valued in northern herbal traditions. Some roots warm the breath, others calm the stomach. Some simply give the mind something to focus on besides the storm clawing at the walls. You think for a moment about how intimate winter life must have been with plants. Even when the world outside lay buried in snow, people carried fragments of summer into the dark: dried herbs, scented oils, woven charms, ways of remembering the time when the sun lasted more than a few hours. These objects are tiny rebellions against winter. There's a little quirk near your elbow: a carved wooden bead tied into someone's blanket fringe. It smells faintly of smoky resin. A small wooden trinket like that could be dipped in pine oil or juniper tar to refresh its scent. Children sometimes use them as comfort objects. Adults too, though they might not admit it. Holding a scented bead during a blizzard night is not childish, it's human. You shift again and feel a thin reed mat beneath part of your bedding. Someone must have laid it there earlier. Reed mats were used not only as insulation, but also to add a pleasant, grassy scent to sleeping areas. Over time, they dried into crisp sheets that rustled softly when touched. A practical floor covering, yes, but also a sensory small joy. Scholars sometimes debate how widespread fragrant comforts were in early northern households. Some argue they were rare luxuries. Others believe they were common enough, especially among households with access to wetland plants or coastal herbs. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Not every home had fragrant bundles, but many used simple plant materials to make deep winter feel less bleak. The longhouse shifts slightly with another gust of wind, but the scent of juniper lingers, warm and calming. You breathe it in. It reminds you of clean forests, of fresh air, of summer fields. It turns the longhouse into something sweeter, turning survival spaces into sleeping places. You nestle deeper under your blankets. The herb-scented air becomes a gentle cradle. The storm's roar dulls. Someone hums quietly again, perhaps inspired by the comfort of the plants around them. You realize how brilliant these little comforts are, how subtle. how intimate, how powerful. They are reminders that even in a world carved by ice and danger, people still sought softness. Not grand softness, small softness, the kind that whispers rather than shouts. You close your eyes with one last breath of pine-sweet air, the herbs guard your rest, the storm stays outside, and sleep, warm and scented, finds you easily. You wake again, just barely, as the longhouse makes a low groaning sound. Not dangerous, more like an old giant stretching in its sleep. The fire has sunk into deep, steady embers. The air is warm enough, the bedding thick enough, the body's close enough that you aren't cold. But your drifting mind lands now on something you've been feeling all night, the strange dance between heat, smoke, and breath inside this wooden world. You shift slightly, letting your eyes adjust to the dim ember glow. The hearth is still the heart of the hall, but it's not blazing. It's barely awake, and suddenly you understand why the longhouse works at all in winter. Everyone is constantly negotiating with the fire. You glance across the room and see the low, rectangular pit, framed by stones blackened from years of smoke. Above it, smoke still rises in a thin, uncertain ribbon toward the roof opening. The Vikings did not have what you'd call a fixed chimney. The placement and size of hearths varied from farm to farm, region to region. Many were long and narrow, meant for steady cooking more than dramatic heating. Others were smaller, tucked close to sleeping platforms. Archaeologists studying longhouses from Denmark to Iceland often find variations that suggest experimentation, different shapes, different placements, different ways of managing smoke. And the truth becomes clearer as you look around tonight. The hearth wasn't a perfect invention, it was a compromise. You notice how some people sleep closer to the fire, rotating their bodies so their feet point toward the warmth. Others sleep along the walls, where rising smoke thins out. No one sleeps directly in the densest part of the smoky air. It's a learned pattern, a choreography taught by generations. If you wake coughing, you move. If your eyes sting too much, you shift to a lower or higher position. The hearth demands attention. Sleep must adjust to its moods. Nearby, a woman sits briefly upright and rubs her eyes. Even with good venting, smoke makes the air thick at times. She takes a slow sip from a horn of water before settling again. You catch her expression. Not irritation, just routine acceptance. The longhouse belongs to the fire as much as it belongs to the people. Someone else stirs, rising to lean over the embers. He uses a long stick to nudge the coals into a tighter cluster. His movements are slow, deliberate. A small mistake could create sparks. A bigger mistake could fill the hall with choking smoke. He tilts his head upward after adjusting the coals, watching how the smoke drifts. Does it rise quickly? Does it spread sideways? Is the wind pressing it back down? These questions matter far more than comfort, they matter for survival. You settle your weight back onto the bedding and reflect on something one of the men said earlier, when the wind was howling against the walls. The fire must eat, but not feast. It's a simple line, yet you feel the meaning now. A fire that burns too hot wastes precious wood and fills the roof space with thick smoke. A fire too weak lets cold creep into joints and bones. So the ideal hearth is not a roaring blaze, it's a patient glow. Some scholars still grapple with the deeper question. Did longhouses rely on a central hearth alone, or did some use side hearths or movable braziers in winter? Evidence is mixed. A few excavation sites hint at secondary burn areas or warmth platforms. Others show only a single, ancient fire pit used for all daily needs. The real picture may be one of diversity families adjusting their fire habits according to climate, materials, and personal preference. And lying here, you feel exactly how variable the lived experience must have been. A hearth isn't a static technology, it's a living relationship. The man tending the embers blows gently across the coals. A small swirl of sparks leaps upward, flickering like fireflies before fading. The air brightens for a moment, illuminating the rafters above. You see the soot stains climbing them in dark layers, each layer a story of winters past. The longhouse roof is not just a structure, it is a record of countless nights where people judged exactly how much fire was safe. A quirky detail catches your eye. Someone has stuck a small wedge-shaped stone near the hearth's edge, almost like a tiny wall. When you ask the man next to you what it's for, he mutters that it keeps sparks from wandering. A spark stopper. Makes sense. Not all households used one, but small stones or bits of scrap metal sometimes served as makeshift barriers. They weren't fancy hearth tools, but simple wisdom learned from too many burned blankets, as he puts it. You breathe in again, and this time the smoke carries a faint bitterness. Not unpleasant, but noticeable. Smoke told the Vikings more than warmth levels. Its scent revealed what kind of wood was burning, how damp it was, whether the fire needed feeding. Some woods burned clean and bright, others smoked heavily. Birch bark could help ignite damp fuel. Driftwood from the coast burned hotter but smelled of salt and resin. You sense how attuned everyone is to these distinctions. Fire knowledge is not optional in this world. It is an everyday craft. Another gust of wind sighs against the walls, and the smoke under the rafters trembles. The watcher near the doorway shifts slightly, glancing up. The man at the hearth watches too. They're reading the same sign. The wind direction is changing. That could mean smoke will suddenly push back into the hall, or it could mean the storm's peak has passed. A slight moment of uncertainty hangs in the air. Even in this shelter, the fire never becomes fully predictable. You feel the tension for a heartbeat, a tension every household has felt for centuries, and then it passes. The smoke resumes its steady rise. The watchers relax. There's a quiet debate barely audible between two elders lying near the far wall. They're discussing whether this longhouse's hearth should have been built a little farther from the doors. One argues that placing it centrally helps warmth reach the benches better. The other insists that shifting it slightly would reduce drafts. You smile, realizing that even experts today don't entirely agree on ideal hearth placement, and neither did the people who lived here. Architecture evolves through arguments whispered in the dark, not just through blueprints. You stretch under the blankets again, letting the warmth of the platform settle into your bones. You begin to appreciate how the longhouse's fire isn't just a tool, it's a personality, a partner, a sometimes cooperative, sometimes stubborn companion that shapes the night as much as the storm does. Everything in this hall, sleeping patterns, ventilation, bedding placement, even the flow of conversation centers on how the hearth behaves. You lift your head one last time. The embers glow steadily now, warm enough to sustain the hall until morning. Outside, the storm moans, but inside, a thin line of smoke rises calmly toward the vent, carrying with it all the little adjustments, debates, tricks, and knowledge that keep the household alive. You let your body soften again, knowing the fire will be watched, tended, coaxed, and understood until dawn. And with that comfort, you slide back towards sleep. You sink into the blankets again, letting the hearth's dull glow blur your vision, when another understanding begins to surface, something bigger than this single longhouse, bigger than this family, bigger even than this storm. All night you've been learning how Vikings slept in winter, but the truth is that Viking sleep wasn't one thing. It shifted, stretched, and reshaped itself across an enormous world. What kept someone warm in Norway wasn't always what kept someone warm in Iceland, or Denmark, or the Baltic, or on the river routes leading toward Kiev and beyond. Geography carved the rules, and people adapted. You close your eyes halfway, and imagine the map of the Viking world spreading around you like a cloak. Fjords to the west, forests to the east, islands and farms and frozen coastlines in every direction. Each place had its own winter and its own answer to the dark. Start in Norway, where long, narrow fjords funnel wind like giant stone corridors. Storms here bite harder, faster. Longhouses tend to be sturdy, timber-framed structures with thick plank walls and steep roofs. Fire management is more conservative. People sleep closer together. Bedding might be heavier dense wool, layered furs, thick cloaks because the cold could seep down the mountains and smother whole valleys. Travelers along the coast sometimes slept under overturned boats or tucked themselves into cliffside niches when caught far from home. The land teaches them to cling tight. Shift south toward Denmark, where winters are still sharp, but the land is gentler, flatter. Houses here sometimes show traces of different layouts, wider longhouses, more open central spaces. The winters don't cut as deeply, so sleeping practices may have allowed for slightly looser clustering. Some households could keep small side fires or braziers for work in the evening. Straw was abundant from farms, so bedding might be thicker, fresher, replaced more often. Nights still required layers, but the cold didn't stalk the bones with quite the same intensity. Then travel west to Iceland, where the earth itself becomes part of the home. Timber is scarce, so people dig deeper into the land. Turf houses with thick earthen walls act like giant thermal blankets. Inside, heat gathers differently, less drafty wood, more breathing soil. Sleeping here means letting the ground hold you. Bedding might be slightly less dependent on furs because turf retains warmth better. though wool still reigns as the primary fabric. The air smells more of damp earth than smoke. The house is a hill wearing a roof. Cross the sea to the Faroe Islands or Greenland, where cold becomes a more personal adversary. Here, longhouses and dwellings lean heavily into turf, stone, and whatever driftwood the ocean gifts. People sleep close, very close, and the layering culture intensifies. Sealskins or thicker marine furs could appear more often in bedding. The wind outside can be a permanent resident, not a visitor. Winter sleep becomes nearly a craft, a specific arrangement of bodies, blankets, and breath tuned to each night's chill. Now turn east. Travel along the coasts of the Baltic, where trade roads weave between forests and frozen inlets. Winters here vary, sometimes wet and heavy, sometimes dry and sharp. Sleeping platforms still line the longhouse walls, but the bedding might lean more on woven textiles, thanks to rich trade connections. Imported dyes, finer weaves, even feather-stuffed cushions could appear in wealthier homes. Nights in these regions might feature more varied comforts, something you can almost smell in the hall now when you think of it. And then, if you follow the rivers south and east, the Daugava, the Dnieper, routes used by Norse traders and settlers, heading toward Kiev and the lands of the Rus, you enter regions with entirely different building traditions. Winters are still fierce, but the houses there shift shape. Timber is abundant. Smoke vents change design. Some dwellings incorporate clay ovens that radiate warmth hours after the fire dies. A clay oven can heat a home more evenly than an open hearth, though the Vikings who settled or traded there adapted gradually, blending their sleep customs with Slavic and Baltic ones. You imagine lying near one of those big clay stoves, massive, slow-burning, warm like an animal. You picture people sleeping on top of them in some regions, or beside them, letting the stored heat soak into their bones. It's not a northern Atlantic solution, but it becomes part of the Norse world as cultural borders blur. The storm outside changes pitch, and your hearing sharpens again. A thin whistle of wind pushes along the roof ridge, the longhouse creaks, and suddenly the contrast between these regions becomes vivid. Sleep in the northwestern fjords is shaped by wind and ice. Sleep on the Baltic coast is shaped by wet, cold, and forest shelter. Sleep in the riverlands is shaped by clay heat and trade wealth. The Viking world was not a single climate, it was a mosaic of winters. You think of clothing next. In colder regions, wool was thicker and more tightly woven. In milder areas, garments could be lighter. In Iceland and Greenland, cloaks sometimes incorporated multiple layers of wool, stitched together for breathability and warmth. In the East, certain households acquired fur-lined garments through trade, making winter nights a touch more luxurious. Someone sleeping tonight in a Danish longhouse might have a different layering strategy than someone in a Norwegian mountain farm, even though both would surely recognize the other's methods. A man near the hearth shifts his position, and you glimpse his cloak striped in 2 shades of brown. It reminds you that textile patterns varied by region too. Some areas had loom traditions that produced tighter tapestries, others preferred twill. These regional differences shaped winter sleep in subtle ways. A cloak with a denser weave might mean the difference between waking warm or waking stiff with cold. You roll your head slightly, noticing a carved wooden chest near the wall. Its hinges are simple, but the style looks different from the local ones you've seen. Perhaps it belonged to someone who traveled eastward or southward. Perhaps it carries bedding from another land, smoother wool, different dyes, a feather pillow brought back from a distant trade port. Travel scattered the Norse world into mosaics of influence. Even along sleeping platforms, you might spot foreign cloth, foreign furs, foreign habits. Researchers still debate how much regional variation truly shaped winter nights. Some argue that the essentials bodies, fire, wool, shared warmth united all these communities. Others claim that regional architecture and climate created fundamentally different winter experiences. Evidence points in both directions, depending on what site you study. But here, wrapped in layers and surrounded by sleepers, the subtleties feel real. You draw your blanket closer and imagine all those distant households sleeping at this same moment across the Viking world, some in turf-built warmth, others in drafty timber halls, others near clay ovens, others under overturned boats, others in forests deep with snow. Different lands, different nights, different methods, but the same need. Survive the cold, preserve warmth, hold the darkness back until morning. Your eyes begin to close again. The storm sighs, the bedding warms, and somewhere inside your drifting thoughts, You feel the breadth of a world held together by winter. You breathe out. The longhouse breathes with you, and you fall asleep inside a culture far larger than the walls around you. You sleep again, deeply this time, until a small itch on your wrist pulls you upward into hazy consciousness. It's nothing serious, just the faintest tickle, the kind that could come from straw, a loose thread, or something far smaller. You shift, scratch lightly, and settle back down. But then your drifting mind lands on an odd but unavoidable truth about Viking winter nights. If you want to know how people really slept, you have to pay attention to the tiny details most storytellers politely ignore. You blink open an eye and let the dim ember light outline the longhouse interior. Thick wooden beams, soot-darkened rafters, straw bedding flattened by bodies, furs heavy with warmth, and all around, the quiet evidence of a lived-in winter world, bits of dust, fallen wool fibers, bits of plant matter from old bedding, the faint musk of animals. It's not dirty in a careless way, it's simply the texture of life, before soap, disinfectant, or sealed windows existed. And beneath that texture lie clues. You shift your head to look more closely at the bedding beneath you. Straw rustles faintly and releases a sweet, dusty smell. The surface of the platform is scattered with tiny fragments, broken husks, bits of wool, lint, and here and there, the dried shell of something that lived long before you arrived tonight. Archaeologists uncover these layers when they excavate longhouses: compacted straw, charred wood, dust, shed fibers, crushed insects, even tiny bones from mice that occasionally found their way in. These traces form the archaeological fingerprint of ordinary life. Your fingers brush the straw again, and you think about how bedding seldom survives the centuries directly. Instead, what remains are impressions, dark stains in the soil, preserved plant fibers in anaerobic pockets, tiny seeds caught between floorboards. These little remnants are how modern researchers know what you're lying on now: a blend of straw, wool scraps, and sometimes the soft down from birds. A practical mix, but not one that escapes the natural world. Then your gaze shifts toward the rafters. Something hangs there, not dangerous, just notable. Meat, as you saw before, but also something smaller. You squint and see a narrow wooden beam streaked with dark residue. Soot, yes, but also grease and microscopic flakes from decades of smoke-cured food. Archaeologists find similar patterns on wood recovered from sagas-era structures. These residues tell stories: what people ate, how they stored it, how they dried it above the warmest part of the hall. But the rafters hold stranger secrets too. In some excavated houses, researchers have found the remains of old pest nests, clusters of debris from wasps or spiders long gone. The longhouse wasn't a sterile vault. It was part of the ecosystem. You think about the faint skitter you heard hours ago near the wall and realize it might not have been your imagination. A quiet murmur nearby draws your attention. Someone, half awake, swats at something gently, not alarmed, just annoyed. A mosquito? In winter, unlikely. A flea? Much more probable. Lice? Also possible. In tightly packed wooden homes heated by smoke and filled with animals, pests were simply part of life. Not rampant infestations every night, but small, persistent presences. Viking combs, beautifully carved bone combs, show up in graves constantly, far more often than many other personal items. People carried them everywhere, because grooming wasn't luxury, it was survival. You think about those combs now: narrow teeth, polished smooth by long use, sometimes decorated with ring and dot motifs or carved beast heads. They weren't just tools, they were daily companions. Archaeologists find nits in old hair samples buried with Viking, remains a clear sign that lice existed even among the wealthy, so the itch on your wrist isn't surprising. It's a reminder that winter sleep, even in the best bedding, came with tiny interruptions. A slightly odd detail lies at the platform's edge: a small clay pot with a few dried leaves in the bottom. You saw someone use it earlier to sprinkle herbs around the bedding. Not just for scent, you now realize. Certain herbs like wormwood or tansy were sometimes believed to discourage insects. It's uncertain exactly how widespread this was in the Viking Age, but later Nordic folk practices strongly suggest that plants were used for discouraging pests long before formal documentation existed. It's one of those little household tricks that never makes it into heroic stories. A soft crunch at your shoulder makes you turn your head. A small shape, a mouse, dashes across the edge of the platform before disappearing into a crack behind a wooden chest. No one reacts. Clearly, this is normal. Mice live in longhouses because longhouses offer what winter outside does not: warmth, food crumbs, protection. People coexisted with them the way they coexisted with the storm-aware, adaptive, mildly resigned. You smile faintly. If you had expected the longhouse to be a spotless sanctuary, tonight is teaching you something essential. Winter survival is not neat. It's layered, textured, embroidered with life both large and small. Even the animals contribute their own traces: flakes of wool, a few stray hairs, scents woven into wood grain. Archaeologists often identify the presence of livestock in old longhouses, not by explicit remains, but by microtraces: hoofwear patterns on floors, trampled plant fibers, compressed dung dust invisible until you know how to see it. Someone shifts beside you, and their blanket slips slightly, revealing the underside of a fur. You notice small holes chewed by insects long ago. That's another archaeological clue. Fur rarely survives intact, but the bite marks, larval casings, and patterns in preserved scraps tell modern researchers which animals commonly provided bedding. Reindeer, sheep, goat, cattle all leave different signatures. You can almost imagine an archaeologist 1,000 years from now reading this platform like a book. A quiet debate drifts from two elders lying near the wall. They're whispering about whether the bedding should be replaced tomorrow. One argues the straw has flattened too much and needs refreshing. The other insists it can last another day. This mirrors a modern academic debate you've heard before. How frequently did Viking households replace their bedding layers? Some evidence suggests it was done often because straw breaks down quickly. Other sites hint that bedding could build up for months before being removed and burned or composted. Like so much else, the truth likely varied by household size, local crops, and the severity of winter. You shift again, feeling straw bunch beneath your hip. You tuck it back into place and marvel at how effectively it still works. Soft enough to cushion, dry enough to insulate, humble enough to be forgotten until you need it. And yet, in the archaeological record, straw is one of the richest archives of winter life. Seeds trapped in bedding tell which crops were grown nearby. Pollen traces tell what fields looked like. Even insects caught between layers reveal the seasons of harvesting. You realize something gently profound. Winter survival in the Viking world didn't depend only on grand architecture or brave deeds. It depended on tiny things: seeds, fibers, fragments, a comb, a charm, a bit of straw that held warmth one more night. And the long house you lie in now is full of these tiny truths. Your wrist no longer itches. You settle deeper into the bedding. A faint rustle, another tiny creature somewhere, means nothing dangerous. It simply means you're inside a living home, one that breathes, hosts, shelters, and remembers. A palace of wood, wool, smoke, and biology. The storm presses on the walls again, and you close your eyes, letting the small life around you fade into a gentle lull. Winter sleep wasn't perfect, but it was real, warm, and alive. You ease back into the blankets, letting your breath slow, when suddenly the whole night seems to draw itself into one long, continuous thread. All the separate details you've noticed: warm bodies, drifting smoke, straw under your back, the storm's voice quietly braid together. And then you feel a pull, a gentle shift, as though you're no longer watching the night in pieces. You're living it hour by hour. So you let yourself slip into the rhythm of a single imagined blizzard night in this longhouse, from the moment the storm swelled to the moment dawn returns. The first hour begins just after dusk. You remember the earlier bustle, people arriving from chores, shaking snow from cloaks, stamping their boots on the packed earth. Children tug old blankets from chests, adults spread fresh straw across the bench. Someone ladles hot stew from the pot. The fire is bright then, crackling with life, its heat pushing the cold toward the walls. Outside, snow begins lightly, almost politely, as though asking permission to stay. You sit near the hearth, feeling the first numbness of your fingers melt away. The second hour arrives with the storm's first true breath. Wind begins its slow, steady push against the longhouse. The door trembles. People glance at one another in silent acknowledgement. The firekeeper adds larger wood to the hearth, knowing warmth must be stored early. Furs are draped over beds, extra cloaks pulled from pegs. Children snuggle into older siblings. The hall tightens into a single warm organism. You find your spot on the bench, spreading your blanket. Someone hands you a piece of bread dipped in fat, your last comfort before lying down. The third hour is when the cold becomes real. The storm outside thickens, and you feel the longhouse react, timbers shifting, the air growing denser near the smoke hole. People settle in properly now, adjusting layers, finding pockets of shared warmth. The door watcher sits closer to the entrance. The animals in the byre rustle, uneasy but comforted by the nearness of humans. You tuck your feet beneath a shared fur, feeling the warmth grow. By the 4th hour, the fire's bright flames fall into a deep glow. Embers pulse in slow waves. The smoke rises in a thin column, steadier than before. The hall is quieter, breaths longer, movements slower. A child rolls closer to their mother. Someone mutters a half-dreamed phrase. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry creature, scraping against the rafters. You feel the storm fully now, the deep cold pressing just inches away, but the bedding holds you like a small, stubborn island of warmth. The 5th hour is when you wake briefly, startled by a gust that slams snow against the roof. The watchers shift positions. Someone checks the embers, nudging them to ensure they last until dawn. Another adjusts the smoke hole flap. Everything is managed softly, without waking those who need sleep the most. You listen to the familiar sounds, the crackle of cooling wood, the faint shuffle of animals, the muffled breathing around you. You drink a small mouthful of warm ale left in a cup by your bed and slide back under the blanket. During the 6th hour, the hall enters its deepest quiet. Even the storm seems to settle into a rhythm. This is the hour of strange dreams. You feel yourself drift in liminal space, warmth below you, cold above, straw rustling faintly underneath. The body relaxes fully, confident that someone is awake to guard the night. You sense, without opening your eyes, that the fire is still alive, a low orange heartbeat in the center of the room. The 7th hour belongs to the coldest part of the night. This is when frost is strongest, when the outside world freezes hardest, when your breath turns thick and warm in the air. The firekeeper tends the embers once more, pushing them together. A few sleepers stir, adjusting cloaks. A warm stone is nudged toward someone's feet. The hall smells of wool, smoke, earth, and bodies, human and animal. Nothing about it is sterile, but everything about it is safe. In the 8th hour, you wake again, gently this time, not from fear, but from instinct. Something has changed. The wind's pitch is different, not softer, but less wild. The storm is beginning to lose its fury. You sense the watchers noticing too. One stands, stretches, checks the walls and beams. He presses his palm against the roof post to judge whether snow has built up dangerously. Satisfied, he returns to his place. You turn in your bedding, the straw cushioning your movement, and drift again. By the 9th hour, a drowsy murmur moves through the hall, the unconscious stirring that happens when people have slept long as a group. Cloaks rustle. Someone coughs. A child mumbles in a dream. The fire is still alive, though small. The animals shift in the byre and let out soft breaths that add to the warm air. You feel your limbs loosen completely, as though the longhouse itself is holding you. The 10th hour arrives slowly, carried by a subtle brightening at the smoke hole. Not daylight, yet only the faintest thinning of darkness. But the body senses it somehow, long before the mind names it morning. The storm, too, begins to ebb. The wind settles into a slow push rather than a furious assault. You pull your blanket tighter, sensing warmth that has built up all night, trapped by walls, bodies, and wool. By the 11th hour, the quiet shifts. Someone near the fire stretches and sits up. Another checks the door. The watchers exchange a glance of relief. The long house has made it through the storm. The embers still glow. No roof beams cracked. No door caved. You feel your own heart settle into a soft, waking rhythm. Soon people will rise fully, but not yet. For now, it is the gentle pre-dawn hush that belongs only to those who have weathered a blizzard together. Finally, the 12th hour dawns not with bright sunlight, but with a dim silver glow leaking through the edges of the door and the roof vent. Someone stirs a pot. Someone yawns. Someone laughs quietly at nothing in particular, the way people do after surviving something long and cold. You stretch beneath your blankets and inhale the air of a house that has fought the storm and won. You exhale, your breath forming a soft cloud in the faint morning light. One night, one storm, one shared battle, and now, slowly, dawn arrives. You linger in that soft twilight state between sleeping and waking, wrapped in warmth that no longer belongs to the night, but to the slow, dawning quiet. The storm has softened. You feel it before you hear it, the way the air no longer presses against the longhouse, the way the timbers no longer tense with every gust. When you finally blink your eyes open, the world inside is still dim, but calmer, gentle, as if the whole house has taken one long exhale. You stretch beneath the blankets, feeling the stiffness in your shoulders where sleep and cold battled gently through the night. Around you, people stir in small ways. A shifting leg, a long sigh, a child rolling into a warmer pocket of bedding. You hear someone rub their palms together, warming them before pushing aside a fur. No one rises abruptly. Winter mornings don't permit haste. Waking is slow, like thawing. A faint grey light slips through the smoke hole. Not bright, not golden, just a pale suggestion that the sky is no longer entirely black. You watch the way it outlines the rafters, the smoke stains, the gentle curve of the roof. The longhouse looks bigger somehow, as though you can finally see its bones after a night of sensing only its breath. Beside the hearth, the firekeeper sits up and inspects the embers. He nudges them gently with his stick, watching how the faint glow brightens. A few sparks rise, tiny and hopeful. He adds a handful of thin sticks dried carefully above the rafters. They hiss at first, then catch, releasing a thin ribbon of smoke that curls upward. The first real flame of morning arrives, not triumphant, but tender. You feel its warmth brush your cheek. The watchers from the night shift relax visibly now. One rolls his shoulders, loosening muscles that held tension for hours. Another stands and steps toward the door, listening. When he lifts the latch, a chilly draft enters, but not the fierce cold of midnight. This is the gentler breath of post-storm air, sharp but no longer punishing. Snowlight pours through the opening, pale and blue-white, filling the hall like a quiet blessing. You sit up slowly, drawing your cloak around your shoulders. The bedding is warm where your body lay, but the air above it is cool enough to make you shiver. Around you, families begin their own subtle rituals, folding furs, shaking out straw, smoothing blankets. Children rub their faces with sleepy fists. Elders stretch their backs, joints clicking softly. Someone laughs a short, warm sound, and the whole hall feels looser, brighter. You notice new smells now that the storm's pressure has lifted. Wood smoke, wool, the faint sweetness of dried herbs crushed during the night, and something sharper, a hint of morning stew being stirred awake in the pot. Breakfast will be simple. Warm grains, maybe a bit of leftover broth, with steam rising into the chilly air. But to a body that endured a blizzard, even simple warmth tastes like triumph. Someone brushes snow from inside the doorway, where the wind pushed tiny drifts through the cracks. The snow is soft now, faintly sparkling. A child kneels to touch it, marveling at how cold it feels compared to the blankets they slept under. Their mother laughs and pulls them away before tiny fingers grow numb. You glance toward the animals in the byre. They are waking too, stamping their hooves, shaking frost from their fur, breathing clouds into the chill air. Their body heat helped keep the longhouse warm through the night. Now, in the pale light, you can see the soft outlines of their forms and the straw matted beneath them. A man crosses the hall to check on them, murmuring quietly, patting a flank here and there. They survived the storm, just as the people did. As you stand and stretch, you look around at the sleeping platform in its morning truth. Blankets tangled, cloaks half-folded, furs slid sideways, straw flattened under dozens of bodies. It looks nothing like the tidy pictures in modern books. It looks lived in, warm, messy, human. You realize this is the after-image of survival, a tapestry of impressions left by bodies that shared warmth all night. And then something inside you softens as your mind gathers everything you've witnessed. The layering, the straw, the furs, the warm stones, the shared watchfulness, the food that became inner heat, the herbs that softened the air, the fire that breathed with the house, the closeness of families, the shifting geography of sleep, the gentle rituals, the tiny discomforts, the practical wisdom, the whole beautiful, imperfect harmony that kept a household alive through a storm strong enough to erase whole landscapes. You feel the lessons settling into you like warmth returning to your fingers. Winter survival was never a single method. It was a web of interlocking habits, small, adaptable, repeated across generations until they became instinct. You slept because the longhouse knew how to hold you, and you survived because everyone inside understood winter as both an enemy and a teacher. The morning light grows brighter. Someone opens the door fully. A sheet of white glows outside, smooth and untouched. Snowbanks rise like soft dunes. The storm has left the world clean and silent. People gather near the entrance, cloaked and yawning, looking out at the transformed world. You step forward too, feeling the cold brush your face for the first time since the night began. It is quiet, astonishingly quiet, and in that quiet, you feel the weight of the night fall away, replaced by something light, hopeful, almost sacred. You survived a Viking blizzard night, not through one secret, but through a whole culture of resilience. The storm has passed now, and the longhouse exhales into the steady quiet of morning. As you stand there at the threshold, watching snow soften under the first pale hints of light, you feel something gentle loosen inside your chest. The world is no longer pressing against the walls. It's simply resting, waiting, calm. The cold outside has softened into something almost peaceful, and the warmth behind you, body heat, fading embers, the comfort of shared sleep lingers like a slow, steady tide. You breathe in, letting the crisp air fill your lungs, and then breathe out just as slowly. Your shoulders drop, your jaw loosens. Even the straw beneath your feet feels softer now, as if the whole house is winding down with you. Around you, people speak in murmurs, their voices warm and low, the way voices always sound after a hard night safely passed. Let that feeling sink in the sense of being held, of being protected, of being part of something steady. You carried warmth through the night, and now the morning carries you in return. The cold no longer bites, it simply brushes past, gentle as the hush of falling snow. So let the longhouse fade into the background. Let the storm melt away from your memory. Feel yourself settling deeper, lighter, softer. Your breath moves like drifting snow. Your thoughts grow slow and warm. Your body feels heavy in the best possible way, ready to slip into complete rest. You came through wind and frost and darkness, and now you stand in quiet light, safe, warm, tired in a way that invites real, peaceful sleep. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your mind smooth out its last ripples. You've reached the quiet after the storm, and you are ready, finally, to drift